A woman publicly rejected in front of an entire frontier town, not for a crime or mistake, but simply for not being what was expected. Stranded, humiliated, with nowhere to turn and winter closing in fast. But when a quiet rancher steps forward with an offer that asks for nothing in return, she faces an impossible choice: trust a stranger in a harsh, unforgiving land, or face the wilderness alone. This is a story of survival, second chances, and discovering that strength isn't found in perfection, it's forged in the refusal to give up. If you want to see how far this story can reach, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. Now, let's begin. The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Bennett's General Store, kicking up a cloud of dust that hung in the cold Montana air like a bad omen. Naomi Carter gripped the edge of the wooden seat, her knuckles white beneath worn gloves. Through the small window, she could see the town, if you could call it that. A handful of weathered buildings lined a dirt road that disappeared into endless plains. Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. She'd imagined this moment 100 times during the 3-week journey from Ohio. In her mind, there had been warmth, maybe even a smile. Now stepping down onto the packed earth with her single trunk thudding beside her, all she felt was the bite of wind and the weight of a dozen curious stares. "You the mail-order bride?" A woman's voice, sharp as creek ice. Naomi turned. The speaker was middle-aged, dressed in a faded calico dress, arms crossed over her chest. Behind her, a small crowd had gathered, men in work clothes, women in aprons, a few children peeking around their mothers' skirts. "I'm Naomi Carter," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm here to meet William Parsons." "That's her?" someone muttered. "Thought she'd be prettier." Naomi's chest tightened, but she kept her chin up. She'd heard worse. Survived worse. The letters from William had been formal but kind, promising a home, stability, a fresh start. She hadn't expected romance, just a chance to build something that mattered. "He's inside." The woman jerked her head toward the store. "Been waiting near an hour." Naomi picked up her skirts and walked toward the building, aware of every eye following her. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the store smelled of leather and tobacco and something sweet she couldn't place. A man stood near the counter, his back to her, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat and a hat that shadowed his face. "Mr. Parsons?" He turned slowly, and Naomi got her first good look at the man she'd traveled halfway across the country to marry. William Parsons was maybe 40, with a neat beard and cold blue eyes that swept over her like she was livestock at auction. The expression on his face made her stomach drop. "You're Naomi Carter." Not a question, a statement, flat and heavy. "Yes, it's good to finally meet you in person. Your letters, I wrote those letters expecting a woman who could present herself properly." His voice carried through the store, deliberate and loud enough for the people outside to hear. "A woman who'd be an asset to a household, not a burden." The words hit like a slap. Naomi felt heat rising in her face, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I don't understand. I've come all this way, just as we agreed. Look at yourself." William gestured dismissively. "You're plain as a fence post, older than you claimed and built like a scarecrow. I need a wife who can work hard, bear children, and present well in this community. You're none of those things." Someone behind her gasped, one of the women who'd followed her inside pretending to browse. Naomi's vision blurred at the edges. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand he take back every cruel word. Instead, she heard herself say very quietly, "I can work. I'm stronger than I look." "You're an embarrassment." William pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and tossed it on the counter between them. "There's enough for your return fare. Stage leaves tomorrow morning. I suggest you be on it." He walked past her without another glance, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. The door slammed behind him, and Naomi stood frozen, staring at the envelope like it might bite her. The woman from earlier, the one in calico, picked up the envelope and pressed it into Naomi's hand. "Probably for the best, dear. William's particular about things. Always has been." "Where am I supposed to go until tomorrow?" Naomi's voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and thin. "There's a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Henshaw runs it. Tell her Pearl sent you." Naomi nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She walked back outside, past the whispering crowd, past the pitying looks and poorly concealed smirks. Her trunk still sat where the driver had left it, too heavy to carry far. She dragged it toward the side of the building and sat down on it, her whole body shaking. 23 days on trains and stages. Every cent she'd saved gone for travel, and the new dress she'd sewn specially for meeting William, the one he'd called plain. No family to return to, no home waiting. Just this, a dusty Montana town where everyone now knew she'd been judged and found wanting. The sun was starting its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. Naomi pulled her shawl tighter and tried to think. The boarding house. Tomorrow's stage. Then what? She'd left Ohio because there was nothing for her there, just memories of her parents' deaths and a cousin who'd made it clear she'd worn out her welcome. Coming west had been a gamble, one final chance to find a place where she belonged. She'd lost. You planning to sleep out here? Naomi's head snapped up. A man stood a few feet away, holding the reins of a horse that looked as tired as she felt. He was maybe 35, lean and weathered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that didn't quite meet hers. His clothes were clean but worn, patched at the elbows. A working man. I'm fine, she said automatically. You're sitting on a trunk in the middle of town looking like someone died. That ain't fine. He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Name's Caleb Turner. I was inside, heard what happened. Of course he had. Probably half the town had heard. Then you know I'm leaving tomorrow. Naomi stood, brushing dust from her skirt. So whatever you're selling, I'm not interested. Not selling anything. Caleb glanced at the horse, then back at her. Got a spare room at my place. Nothing fancy, just a roof and a bed. You're welcome to it for the night. No charge. Naomi stared at him. Why would you do that? Because it's going to freeze tonight, and Mrs. Henshaw's boarding house burned down last month. Pearl knows that, but she's too busy gossiping to care. He picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing. You coming or not? She should say no. Should tell him she didn't need charity from a stranger who might want something in return. But the temperature was dropping fast, and the thought of spending the night huddled against the store wall made her eyes sting with tears she refused to shed. One night, she said. One night. Caleb tied her trunk to the horse and started walking. Naomi followed, aware of more stares, more whispers. Let them talk. She'd be gone tomorrow anyway, nothing but another story to tell over Sunday dinner. They walked in silence through the town and out onto a narrow road that cut through grassland turning gold in the fading light. Caleb's homestead appeared after about 20 minutes, a small house with a sagging porch, a barn that had seen better days, and a chicken coop that listed to one side like a drunk. It's not much, Caleb said, and Naomi realized he sounded almost apologetic. It's more than I have right now. He nodded and carried her trunk up the porch steps. The door stuck when he pushed it, groaning on rusty hinges. Inside, the house was dim and sparse, a main room with a stone fireplace, a rough table, a few chairs. Everything was clean but tired, like it had been functional once and was now just hanging on. Spare rooms through there. Caleb gestured to a doorway. I'll get a fire going. You hungry? Naomi hadn't eaten since morning, but her stomach was too knotted to care. I'm fine. You keep saying that. He crouched by the fireplace, stacking kindling. Doesn't make it true. Why are you helping me? The question came out sharper than she intended. You don't know me. I could be anyone. Caleb struck a match, his face briefly illuminated in the flare of light. Could say the same about you trusting me. I don't have a choice. Everyone's got choices. They're just not always good ones. The kindling caught, flames licking at the larger logs. I'll make some coffee. You should sit down before you fall down. Naomi wanted to argue, but her legs were shaking. She sank into one of the chairs, her hands trembling in her lap. The warmth from the fire crept toward her slowly, like it wasn't sure she deserved it. Caleb moved around the small kitchen area with quiet efficiency, measuring coffee grounds, filling a battered pot with water from a bucket. He didn't try to make conversation, didn't offer empty platitudes about how things would work out. Naomi was grateful for that. She'd had enough false comfort for one day. The coffee, when it came, was strong and bitter. She drank it anyway. You got people back east? Caleb asked finally, leaning against the counter. No. You? 2 kids. They're with my sister-in-law in town tonight. School thing. Naomi looked up, surprised. You're married? Was. Sarah died 2 years ago. Fever. I'm sorry. He shrugged, but she saw the tightness around his eyes. Happens out here. She was always delicate, not built for this kind of life. Kept trying anyway. He poured himself coffee. Kids are 7 and 9, Emma and Daniel. Good kids, just lost, I guess. Like me. There was something in his voice, not self-pity, but a kind of resigned exhaustion that Naomi recognized in her own chest. Why tell me this? She asked. Because you're sitting there thinking you're the only one who's been judged and found lacking. You're not. Caleb set his cup down. Parsons is a fool. But this town, it eats people who don't fit, spits them out or grinds them down. You're smart to leave. I don't feel smart. I feel like I failed. At what? Matching some jackass's fantasy? Despite everything, Naomi almost smiled. When you put it that way. Only way to put it. Caleb straightened. Get some sleep. I'll wake you before dawn so you can make the stage. He disappeared into what must have been his room, leaving Naomi alone with the fire and the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. She sat there for a long time, watching the flames dance and trying not to think about what came next. The spare room was barely big enough for a bed and a crate that served as a table. The mattress was thin but clean, and someone, Sarah probably, had made a quilt with careful, even stitches. Naomi lay down fully clothed, pulling the quilt to her chin. She didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion dragged her under anyway. Morning came too soon, gray light seeping through a crack in the shutters. Naomi woke to the sound of voices, children's voices, high and uncertain. Papa said not to wake her. I just want to see. You're going to get in trouble. Naomi sat up slowly, her back aching from the unfamiliar mattress. Through the gap in the doorway, she could see 2 small figures hovering near the main room, a girl with tangled blonde hair and a boy who looked like a smaller, sharper version of Caleb. Good morning, Naomi said quietly. The girl jumped. The boy grabbed her arm, pulling her back. We didn't mean to bother you, ma'am. You're not bothering me. Naomi stood, smoothing her dress. You must be Emma and Daniel. Emma nodded, still half hiding behind her brother. Papa said you're leaving today. That's right. Why? Emma, Daniel hissed. No, it's all right. Naomi stepped into the main room, where Caleb was frying eggs at the stove. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. I came here to meet someone, but it didn't work out, so I'm going back. Back where? Emma asked. That was the question, wasn't it? Back to what? To where? Haven't decided yet, Naomi said, which was the truth. Caleb set plates on the table. Eat first. Stage doesn't leave for another hour. They ate in awkward silence. Naomi, Caleb, and the 2 children who kept sneaking glances at her like she might disappear if they looked away. The eggs were overcooked and the bread was stale, but Naomi ate every bite, knowing she'd need the strength for whatever came next. Afterward, Caleb loaded her trunk back onto the horse, while Emma and Daniel stood on the porch, watching. Naomi thanked them for their hospitality, her words formal and insufficient. You're really going? Emma asked, and there was something in her voice, something that sounded almost like disappointment. I am. Papa. Emma tugged on Caleb's sleeve. Can't she stay? Emma, that's not... Caleb stopped, looking at Naomi with an expression she couldn't quite read. She's got her own life to figure out. But you said we needed help. You said things were hard. Emma. The warning was clear now. Naomi knelt down so she was eye level with the girl. You're sweet to worry, but your papa's right. I need to go. Emma's lower lip trembled. Everybody leaves. The words hit harder than they should have. Naomi looked up at Caleb, saw him flinch like he'd been struck. Not everybody, Daniel said quietly, but he didn't sound convinced. Naomi stood. Caleb was staring at something in the distance, his jaw tight. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. What if you didn't go? Naomi blinked. What? What if you stayed? Not... He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Not like what Parsons wanted, just help. Around here, the kids need someone who can cook something besides burned eggs. The house needs work. Winter's coming and I can't do it all alone. He was talking fast now, like if he stopped he'd lose his nerve. Room and board. Small wage when I can manage it. No strings. You leave whenever you want. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a choice. Caleb met her eyes. Stay or go. Either way, no judgment. Naomi's mind raced. Stay in this tiny, struggling homestead with a widower and 2 grieving children? Work herself to exhaustion for maybe a few dollars and a drafty room? It was insane, desperate, exactly the kind of decision she'd promised herself she wouldn't make. But the alternative was climbing back on that stage with no destination, no plan, and maybe enough money to last a few weeks if she was careful. What do you think? She looked at Emma and Daniel. Should I stay? Emma's face lit up. Daniel nodded slowly, cautiously, like he was afraid to hope. All right, Naomi said, surprising herself. I'll stay. For now. Odd. The first week was brutal. Naomi threw herself into work with a kind of desperate energy, as if proving her worth would somehow erase the humiliation of being rejected. She scrubbed floors that hadn't been properly cleaned in months, patched holes in clothing, and attempted to organize a kitchen that seemed designed for chaos. The children watched her with wary curiosity. Emma, the younger one, warmed to her quickly. Too quickly, really, like she was starving for any scrap of feminine attention. Daniel was harder, all sharp edges and suspicious glances, testing her constantly with small acts of defiance. Caleb mostly stayed out of her way, working from dawn until well past dark on repairs that never seemed to end. When they did speak, it was practical, transactional. Need more firewood. Chickens aren't laying. Storm coming. It should have been lonely. Somehow, it wasn't. On the 8th day, Naomi woke to find Emma sitting on the edge of her bed, crying silently. Hey! Naomi sat up, instantly awake. What's wrong? I had a bad dream. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Mama was in it, but she didn't know me anymore. Naomi's throat tightened. She thought about offering reassurance, some platitude about how mothers never forget their children. But Emma was 9 years old and living in a world where people left and didn't come back. She deserved more than pretty lies. Dreams can be cruel, Naomi said instead. They take our fears and make them real, even when they're not. Do you have bad dreams? Sometimes. About what? Naomi hesitated. About being invisible. About not mattering to anyone. Emma leaned against her shoulder, small and warm. You matter to us. Something in Naomi's chest cracked open. She put her arm around the child, and they sat like that until the sun came up and Daniel shouted that breakfast was burning. October slid into November, and the cold came down from the mountains like a judgment. Caleb worked frantically to winterize the barn, shore up the chicken coop, and chop enough wood to last until spring. Naomi took over more of the household work, freeing him to focus on survival tasks. They developed a rhythm, unspoken but effective. She'd have coffee ready when he stumbled in at dawn. He'd make sure the water barrel was filled before she woke, small gestures that added up to something that almost felt like partnership. One afternoon, Naomi found Daniel in the barn, struggling with a math primer that was clearly beyond him. Need help? She asked. He looked up, frustrated and embarrassed. I'm stupid. You're not stupid. The book's just poorly written. Naomi sat down beside him. Let me see. They worked through the problems together, Naomi explaining concepts in ways the primer hadn't bothered to. Daniel's face gradually shifted from sullen to focused to almost pleased when he got one right on his own. Miss Naomi, he said as they were finishing. Just Naomi's fine. Are you staying? Really staying? I don't know, she answered honestly. Why? Because Emma already loves you, and if you leave, it's going to break her. What about you? Daniel's jaw set in a way that reminded her painfully of Caleb. I'm used to it. Naomi reached out and ruffled his hair, ignoring his half-hearted protest. I'm not planning to leave. Not yet. People's plans change. Sometimes. But I'll do my best. That's all anyone can do. He nodded, not quite satisfied but willing to accept it. After he left, Naomi sat in the cold barn and wondered when this place had started feeling less like a way station and more like something she might actually want to keep. The first real snow came in mid-November, 3 days of relentless white that buried the world and left them trapped inside. Caleb paced like a caged animal, worried about the livestock, the roof, a dozen things that could go wrong. Naomi kept the children occupied with games and stories, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. On the second night, Emma woke screaming from a nightmare. Naomi got to her first, but Caleb appeared moments later, his face haggard. "She all right?"
Just scared. Naomi was sitting on Emma's bed, the child curled against her side. Go back to sleep. I've got this. Caleb didn't move. In the dim light from the lamp, Naomi could see exhaustion carved into every line of his face. When's the last time you slept? She asked. I'm fine. You keep saying that. Doesn't make it true. He almost smiled at having his own words thrown back at him. Touché. I mean it, Caleb. You're going to collapse. Can't afford to.
Can't afford not to.
Naomi kept her voice gentle. Let me help. That's why I'm here. You're here because I made you a desperate offer and you had nowhere else to go. Maybe that's how it started, but that's not why I'm still here. The words hung in the air between them. Emma had fallen back asleep, her breathing slow and even. Caleb looked at Naomi like he was trying to solve a puzzle that kept changing shape. Why are you still here? He asked finally.
Because for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm actually useful. Like I matter. Naomi adjusted the blanket over Emma. That's worth more than I thought. Caleb nodded slowly. Get some rest. Morning's going to come whether we're ready or not. He left, and Naomi lay down beside Emma, listening to the wind howl outside and wondering if she'd said too much or not enough. The snow eventually stopped, and life resumed its hard, relentless rhythm. Caleb taught Naomi how to manage the chickens, how to read weather signs, how to conserve resources when supplies ran low. She taught Emma her letters and helped Daniel with his numbers and learned that competence could be a kind of currency all its own. One evening in early December, a rider came by, a neighbor from 2 miles west looking for a stray cow. He eyed Naomi with open curiosity while Caleb explained they hadn't seen it. This your new wife? The man asked. No, Caleb said quickly. She's helping with the house, the kids. Huh. The man didn't look convinced. Town's talking, about how you took in Parsons' reject. Naomi felt her face burn, but before she could respond, Caleb stepped forward. Parsons is a fool who threw away the best thing that ever came his way. And if the town's got nothing better to talk about than other people's business, maybe they should find some work to keep them busy. The neighbor raised his hands. No offense meant. Then keep your thoughts to yourself. Caleb's voice was flat and cold. Good luck with your cow. After the man left, Naomi turned to Caleb. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. He was still angry, his hands clenched at his sides. I'm tired of people thinking they can judge us, when they don't know anything. It doesn't matter what they think. It matters to me. The confession seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. They stood there in the fading light, the space between them charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Thank you, Naomi said softly. Caleb nodded and walked back toward the barn, leaving her standing on the porch, her heart beating just a little bit faster. Christmas arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. Naomi had been saving bits of fabric and thread, and she managed to make simple cloth dolls for Emma and a slingshot for Daniel. Caleb gave her a pair of gloves he'd traded for in town, practical, warm, and clearly chosen with care. They had a modest dinner, and afterward, Emma begged for a story. Naomi found herself telling them about her childhood in Ohio, about her parents and the little house by the river. She kept it light, focusing on happy memories, but she saw Caleb watching her with an expression that made her chest tight. Later, after the children were asleep, they sat by the fire, neither of them quite ready to call it a night. This was nice, Caleb said. Better than the last 2 years. The bar was probably pretty low. He smiled, a real smile, not the half grimace she usually got. Still, you made it good for them, for us. It's the least I could do. It's more than that. You know it is. Naomi stared at the flames, feeling the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on her. Caleb, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. He stood, brushing off his pants. Merry Christmas, Naomi. Merry Christmas. He left her there, and she sat for a long time, trying to understand when survival had started feeling like something more, something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Bashem. January brought storms that lasted days, isolating them completely. Supplies ran low, and Caleb's worry became palpable. But they managed, stretching everything as far as it would go, finding small moments of warmth in the cold. One night, Naomi was mending by lamplight when Caleb sat down across from her, his face serious. "I need to tell you something," he said. Her heart sank. This was it. The moment he told her to leave, that he couldn't afford her anymore, that she'd been a temporary solution to a permanent problem. "All right. The ranch is struggling. I mean, really struggling. I don't know if we'll make it through to spring." He looked down at his hands. "I wanted you to know because you deserve to make your own choices. If you need to go back to town, find something more stable, I'll understand." Naomi set down her mending. "Is that what you want?" "No." The word came out rough and honest. "But it's not about what I want. You've got your whole life ahead of you. This place, us, we're barely hanging on. You could do better." "Better than what? Better than a place where I feel like I belong? Better than children who look at me like I matter?" She was surprised by the heat in her own voice. "Better than waking up every morning knowing I'm part of something real?" Caleb looked up, his eyes searching hers. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm staying, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I don't want to be anywhere else." The truth of it settled over her like a cloak. "We'll figure out spring when it comes. Together." The silence stretched between them, loaded with possibility. Then Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. Rough fingers, warm palm, a connection that felt like something breaking open. "Together," he repeated quietly. And for the first time since stepping off that stage in Montana, Naomi felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd found exactly where she was supposed to be. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and sending snow skittering across the porch. But inside, with Caleb's hand warm in hers and the fire crackling low, Naomi felt something shift, not just between them, but inside herself. Like a door she'd kept bolted was finally starting to open. The moment stretched, neither of them quite ready to let go or push forward. Then Daniel coughed from the other room, a wet, rattling sound that broke the spell. Caleb pulled his hand back and stood. "That cough's been hanging on too long." "I'll make him some tea with honey," Naomi said, grateful for something concrete to focus on. "And we should keep him warm tomorrow. Let him rest." "Can't afford for him to get worse." Caleb rubbed his face, exhaustion creeping back into his features. "Winter's only half done." They worked together in the small kitchen, Naomi heating water while Caleb found the last precious jar of honey buried in the back of a cupboard. Their movements had a practiced ease now, born from months of shared space and common purpose. When Naomi brought the tea to Daniel's bedside, the boy was curled under his blanket, his face flushed with fever. Emma slept soundly in the bed next to his, oblivious. "Drink this," Naomi whispered, helping Daniel sit up. "All of it." "Tastes like dirt," he muttered, but he drank it anyway. "You complain like an old man, you know that?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "Papa says I get it from Mama." It was the first time he'd mentioned Sarah without prompting. Naomi smoothed the hair back from his forehead, feeling the heat radiating from his skin. "Your mama must have been someone special." "She was." Daniel's eyes were already drifting closed. "But she wasn't strong like you." The words hit Naomi square in the chest. She sat with him until his breathing evened out, then returned to the main room where Caleb was banking the fire for the night. "He say anything?" Caleb asked without turning around. "That I'm strong." Naomi wasn't sure why she said it, but something in her needed him to know. And that Sarah wasn't. Caleb's shoulders tensed. "He's just a kid. He's not wrong though, is he?" Naomi kept her voice gentle. "About Sarah, I mean." For a long moment, Caleb didn't respond. Then he stood and faced her, his expression raw in the firelight. "Sarah was good, kind. She tried her best in a place that demanded more than she had to give." He paused. "I loved her, but I also watched her break a little more every day, and I couldn't stop it, couldn't save her." "That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I'm the one who dragged her out here, promised her a life that turned out to be just survival with extra steps." His laugh was bitter. "She deserved better." "Maybe she just deserved different," Naomi said. "That doesn't make what you had any less real." Caleb looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. "How'd you get so wise?"
I'm not wise. I just know what it's like to feel like you're not enough. Naomi wrapped her arms around herself. Difference is, Sarah had someone who loved her anyway. I didn't even get that. Parsons was an idiot. Parsons was honest. He wanted something I couldn't be. She met Caleb's eyes. But maybe that's not always a bad thing. Maybe it just means you haven't found the right fit yet. The air between them felt charged again, heavy with possibility. Caleb took a step closer, then stopped himself, jaw tight. You should get some sleep. Daniel's going to need you tomorrow. It felt like a dismissal, but Naomi didn't push. She nodded and retreated to her room, closing the door and leaning against it, her heart hammering. What was she doing? Letting herself care about these people, this place. Letting herself imagine a future that might not exist past spring? But as she lay down and pulled Sarah's quilt over her, she couldn't quite bring herself to regret it. Daniel's fever broke after 2 days, but it left him weak and irritable. Naomi kept him inside, feeding him broth and reading to him from the few books they had, mostly primers and an old adventure novel with half the pages missing. Emma appointed herself assistant nurse, bringing her brother water and extra blankets and generally making herself indispensable. Caleb threw himself into work with renewed intensity, like if he just moved fast enough, worked hard enough, he could outrun whatever was chasing him. Naomi recognized the impulse. She'd done the same thing after her parents died, scrubbing floors until her hands bled, anything to keep the grief at bay. One afternoon, while Daniel napped and Emma was playing with her dolls, Naomi ventured out to the barn where Caleb was repairing a broken stall door. Need an extra pair of hands? She asked. He looked up, surprised. You should be inside where it's warm. I've been inside for 3 days. I'm going stir-crazy. She picked up a hammer. Show me what needs doing. They worked side by side, Caleb explaining the repair while Naomi held boards steady and drove nails with more enthusiasm than accuracy. It felt good to be doing something physical, something that had a clear beginning and end. You're not half bad at this, Caleb said after a while, examining her work. High praise from someone who once told me I held a hammer like it might bite me. That was 2 months ago. You've learned. Naomi set down the hammer, flexing her sore fingers. I've had a good teacher. I'm not a teacher. I'm just someone who's too stubborn to quit. Same thing sometimes. Caleb leaned against the repaired stall, studying her with that intense look that made her feel like he could see straight through her. You're different than when you first got here. How? Less brittle, like you're not waiting for the next bad thing anymore. Naomi considered this. He wasn't wrong. Somewhere between the rejection and the present moment, she'd stopped bracing for disaster and started just living. Maybe I finally found something worth not running from. The kids love you, you know. Emma talks about you constantly, and Daniel, Caleb shook his head. He doesn't let people in easy, but you got past his walls somehow. What about you? The question was out before Naomi could stop it. Do I get past your walls? Caleb's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across his face before he shuttered it. I don't have walls. I'm just practical. That's the biggest lie you've told since I got here. Naomi, it's okay to be scared, Caleb. It's okay to not know what comes next. I can't afford to be scared. I've got 2 kids depending on me, a ranch that's one bad storm away from going under, and he stopped abruptly. And what? He turned away, his jaw working. And someone living under my roof who makes me think about things I have no business thinking about. The confession hung in the cold air between them. Naomi's breath caught, her pulse suddenly loud in her ears. What kind of things? The kind that make a man forget he's got no right to want more than he's already been given. Caleb's voice was rough, almost angry. The kind that could mess up a good thing if I'm not careful. And if I'm thinking the same things? Caleb turned back to her, his eyes dark and intense. Are you? Before Naomi could answer, Emma's voice rang out from the house, high and panicked. Papa, Papa, come quick! They ran. Inside, Daniel was on his feet but swaying, his face pale and slick with sweat. Emma stood beside him, her small hands trying to steady him. I'm fine, Daniel said, but his voice was thin. Just stood up too fast. Caleb caught him as his knees buckled. You're burning up again. The fever had come back worse than before. They spent the next 48 hours in a blur of cold compresses, forced fluids,
and the kind of helpless worry that made every minute feel like an hour. Naomi barely slept, alternating with Caleb to sit with Daniel while Emma curled up in her own bed, scared and trying not to show it. On the second night, Daniel's fever spiked so high he started talking nonsense, calling for his mother, fighting invisible enemies. Caleb paced like a caged animal while Naomi sponged Daniel's face and chest with cool water, murmuring reassurances she wasn't sure she believed. "We need a doctor," Caleb said finally. "This is beyond what we can handle. In this weather, it's a 2-hour ride to town even in good conditions."
I don't care. I'm not losing him. Caleb's voice cracked. I can't lose him too. Naomi looked at Daniel's small, feverish face and made a decision. "Then go. I'll keep him stable until you get back." "I can't leave you alone with—" "Yes, you can. Emma needs you to be strong, and Daniel needs a doctor. So go." She caught his arm. "And ride safe. We'll be here when you get back." Caleb hesitated for one more moment, then grabbed his coat and headed into the storm. The hours that followed were the longest of Naomi's life. She kept Daniel as cool as she could, forced water between his cracked lips, and prayed to whoever might be listening that the fever would break. Emma woke up and came to sit beside her, silent and scared. "Is Daniel going to die like Mama?" Emma whispered. Naomi wanted to lie, to promise everything would be fine, but she'd learned that children could smell false comfort a mile away. "I don't know, but we're doing everything we can and your papa's bringing help." "I don't want to be alone again." Naomi pulled Emma into her lap, holding her tight. "You're not alone. You have your papa, and you have your brother, and you have me." "But what if—" "No what ifs. We deal with right now, and right now we're all here together." Naomi pressed her cheek to Emma's hair. "Sometimes that has to be enough." They sat like that for a long time, while the wind howled outside and Daniel's breathing came shallow and fast. Then, just as dawn started to gray the windows, his fever broke. The change was subtle at first, his skin cooling slightly, his breathing evening out. But within an hour, he was sleeping more peacefully than he had in days. Emma fell asleep in Naomi's arms, exhausted from worry. Naomi stayed awake, watching Daniel's chest rise and fall, too wired to rest. When Caleb burst through the door with the doctor an hour later, she could have wept with relief. Dr. Morrison was a gruff, efficient man who examined Daniel with practiced hands and pronounced the worst was over. "Keep him warm, keep him hydrated, no excitement for a week. He'll be weak for a while, but he'll recover." Caleb sagged against the wall like someone had cut his strings. "Thank you." "Thank your wife," Dr. Morrison said, nodding at Naomi. "She kept him alive until I could get here." "She's not," Caleb started, then stopped. "She did. She really did." After the doctor left, Naomi made coffee with shaking hands while Caleb checked on both children. When he came back to the main room, his eyes were red-rimmed and his face was haggard. "I thought I was going to lose him," he said quietly, "just like Sarah, just like everything else. But you didn't." Naomi handed him coffee. "He's going to be fine. Because of you." Caleb set the cup down without drinking. "I don't even know how to— What I'm trying to say is—" "I know." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression made Naomi's breath catch. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. This time he didn't pull away. He just stood there, his fingers curled around hers, anchor and lifeline all at once. "I'm glad you stayed," he said finally. "So am I." None. February arrived with the kind of cold that made the air hurt to breathe. Daniel recovered slowly, frustrated by his weakness, but grudgingly accepting Naomi's restrictions. Emma shadowed Naomi's every move, as if afraid she might disappear if left unwatched for too long. The crisis had shifted something fundamental between Caleb and Naomi. They didn't talk about it, didn't seem to know how. But it was there in the way their eyes met across rooms, in the careful way they moved around each other, in the conversations that started about practical matters and ended somewhere deeper. One evening, after the children were asleep, Naomi was mending one of Caleb's shirts when he sat down across from her. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." "Why'd you really answer that advertisement? The one from Parsons?" Naomi's needle paused mid-stitch. "I told you I had nowhere else to go." "That's the practical reason, but there's usually more to it than that." She set down her mending and looked at him. You want the truth? Always. I was tired of being invisible, of moving through life like I was just taking up space. Naomi's voice was steady, but the words cost her. My parents died when I was 20. My cousin took me in, but I was just another mouth to feed, another burden. I worked at a textile mill for a while, but it was grinding, meaningless. Then I saw Parsons' advertisement, and I thought maybe somewhere far away, I could be something more than just the girl nobody wanted. You're not invisible, Caleb said fiercely. You're the most visible person I know. Now, maybe, but back then? She shook her head. Back then, I was just someone easy to overlook. His loss. Caleb leaned forward, his eyes intent. His massive, idiotic loss. Naomi felt heat rising in her cheeks. What about you? Why'd you come out here? Same as most people, I guess. Wanted land of my own, a fresh start. Sarah and I met back in Illinois. She was the daughter of a shopkeeper, all soft hands and big dreams. I thought I could give her a good life. He laughed without humor. Turns out, I was better at dreaming than delivering. You gave her children who love her memory and a home you built with your own hands. That counts for something. Does it? Some days I'm not sure. Caleb rubbed his face. Some days I think I should pack up the kids, sell this place for whatever I can get, and go back east where life isn't quite so hard. But you don't. No, because for all its problems, this place is mine. I carved it out of nothing, and giving up would feel like admitting I was wrong about everything. He met her eyes. Stubborn, remember? I remember. Naomi picked up her mending again, mostly to have something to do with her hands. For what it's worth, I think you did give Sarah something valuable. You gave her you, and from what the kids say, that wasn't nothing. And what about you? Caleb's voice was quieter now. What are you getting out of all this? Naomi thought about her answer carefully. Purpose. Belonging. A reason to wake up in the morning that isn't just survival. She met his eyes. And maybe, if I'm lucky, a chance to build something that lasts. You planning to stay past spring then? Are you asking me to? The question hung between them, loaded with everything they hadn't said. Caleb's hands were flat on the table, and Naomi could see the tension in his shoulders. What if I am? He said finally. Then I'd say we should probably figure out what that looks like. Beyond just room and board. Caleb stood abruptly and moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. I can't offer you much. The ranch is barely holding on, money's always tight, and you'd be taking on 2 kids who come with more baggage than a freight train. I'm not asking for much. You should be. You should be asking for everything. He turned to face her, and the raw honesty in his expression made her chest tight. You deserve someone who can give you a real home, security, a future that isn't held together with spit and hope. Naomi stood too, crossing the room until she was close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. What if this is the future I want? You don't know what you're saying. Yes, I do. She kept her voice steady. I've spent my whole life being practical, safe, trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. And where did it get me? Rejected in front of a crowd and stranded in the middle of nowhere. She took a breath. But then nowhere turned into here. And here, I'm not trying to fit. I just am. So don't tell me what I should want, Caleb Turner. I know exactly what I want. And what's that? This, you, the kids, the ranch with its broken shutters and leaky roof. All of it. She saw him start to protest and pushed forward. I know it's hard. I know there are no guarantees, but I'm done playing it safe. Safe got me nothing. Caleb's jaw worked, a dozen emotions crossing his face. Then, almost without seeming to mean to, he reached out and cupped her face in his work-rough hand. You're sure? I'm sure. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, to change her mind. But Naomi didn't move. And when his lips finally met hers, it felt less like a first kiss and more like a recognition, like something that had been inevitable from the moment he'd picked up her trunk outside Bennett's general store. The kiss was brief, tentative, and when they pulled apart, Caleb looked almost stunned. That was, he started. Overdue, Naomi finished. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first genuine one she'd seen in weeks. Yeah, it was. They stood there for a moment longer, neither quite sure what came next.
Then Caleb cleared his throat. We should probably talk about this. Figure out tomorrow, Naomi said. We can figure it out tomorrow. He nodded, looking relieved. Tomorrow. But as Naomi lay in bed that night, sleep evading her despite her exhaustion, she knew tomorrow would bring its own complications. Because wanting something and having it work were two very different things, and this ranch, this life, demanded more than just good intentions. Still, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something close to hope. The next morning arrived with brittle sunshine and temperatures cold enough to make breathing painful. Naomi woke early, her conversation with Caleb replaying in her mind, and found him already in the kitchen, making coffee with the focused intensity of someone avoiding thought. Morning, she said carefully. Morning. He didn't look at her, just poured coffee with slightly shaking hands. Kids still asleep? Emma is. Daniel was coughing earlier, but he settled. They stood in awkward silence, the easy rhythm they'd developed now disrupted by everything unspoken. Finally, Caleb set down his cup. About last night. Caleb, if you're going to tell me it was a mistake. No, that's not. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I'm not good at this. Words and feelings and all of that. I'm better with hammers and wood and things that make sense. People don't make sense, Naomi said. That's part of the deal. I know, but I need you to understand something. He finally met her eyes. If we do this, if we really do this, there's no halfway. I can't have you here as something temporary, something that might leave when things get hard. The kids can't take that. I can't take that. I already told you I'm staying. You said it last night after a long day and an emotional conversation. I need to know you mean it in the daylight when things are normal and boring and hard. His voice was raw. I need to know you're in this for real. Naomi stepped closer, looking up at him. I'm in this for real. And I know what hard looks like. I've been living it right alongside you. I'm not running. Caleb searched her face like he was trying to read a difficult text. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, then we do this proper. I'll talk to Reverend Michaels next time I'm in town. See about... Wait, Naomi held up a hand. Are you proposing to me? He blinked. I thought that was obvious. You didn't actually ask. I'm not good at romantic gestures, Naomi. I'm just trying to do the right thing. The right thing isn't the same as wanting it. She kept her voice gentle but firm. So, before we go any further, I need to know, is this about propriety? About making sure the kids have a mother and the ranch has help? Or is this about us? Caleb looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he took her hands in his, calloused and warm. It's about us, he said quietly. It's about waking up and realizing the best part of my day is seeing you across the breakfast table. It's about watching you with my kids and feeling something I thought died with Sarah. It's about being terrified that you might leave and taking whatever steps I can to make sure you don't. He paused. So yeah, I'm asking. Not because it's proper, because I want you to stay. Not as help, as my wife. Naomi felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. That's the most words I've ever heard you string together. Is that a yes? That's a yes. This time when he kissed her, it was less tentative, more certain, like sealing a contract that mattered more than any piece of paper. When they pulled apart, Emma was standing in the doorway to her room, her eyes wide. Are you getting married? She asked. Naomi looked at Caleb, who looked back at her, and they both started laughing, the slightly hysterical laughter of people who'd just made a life-altering decision before breakfast. Yeah, Caleb said. We're getting married. Emma shrieked and ran to hug them both, and Daniel appeared moments later, looking rumpled and confused, but pleased in his quiet way. Does this mean Naomi's staying forever? Emma asked. That's the plan, Naomi said. Good. Emma squeezed tighter. I already told Sarah Blackwood you were my mama anyway. Emma! Caleb's voice was sharp. We talked about this. Naomi isn't replacing your mother. I know that, Papa. But Mama's gone and Naomi's here, and she does mama things, so it's not really lying. Emma looked up at Naomi with perfect child logic. Right? Naomi felt her throat tighten. She knelt down so she was eye level with Emma. Your mama will always be your mama. Nobody can replace her. But if you want, I can be someone else who loves you. Someone different, but just as real. Emma considered this seriously, then nodded. Okay. Can I call you Mama Naomi? Naomi glanced at Caleb, who looked like he might come apart at the seams. He nodded slightly. If you want to, Naomi said. I want to. Emma turned to her brother. What about you, Daniel? Daniel, always more cautious, studied Naomi with old eyes. I don't know yet. Maybe just Naomi for now? That's fine, Naomi assured him. Whatever feels right. But you're staying, Daniel pressed. You're really staying. I'm really staying. Something in the boy's face finally relaxed, like he'd been holding his breath for months and could finally let it out. Okay, that's good. Word traveled fast in a small frontier community. Within a week, everyone knew that Caleb Turner was marrying the woman William Parsons had rejected. The reactions ranged from supportive to scandalized, with most people falling somewhere in between. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, the one Pearl had lied about burning down, stopped Naomi in the general store one afternoon in late February. So you're really doing it, she said, not unkindly. Marrying Caleb. I am. You know people are talking. People always talk. True enough. Mrs. Patterson selected a sack of flour, examining it critically. For what it's worth, I think you're good for him. And those kids need a mother. I'm not trying to replace Sarah. Of course not. But Sarah's gone, and life moves on whether we like it or not. The older woman's expression softened. Just don't let the gossips get to you. Most of them are just bored and looking for entertainment. I'll keep that in mind. At the counter, Mr. Bennett rang up their purchases with a knowing smile. Heard congratulations are in order. Thank you, Naomi said evenly. Caleb's a good man. Lost his way a bit after Sarah passed, but he's finding his footing again. Bennett handed her the wrapped parcels. You planning a big ceremony? No, just family and a few friends. Smart. Keep it simple. He winked. Marriages that start quiet tend to last longer anyway. On the walk back to the wagon, Naomi was stopped twice more, once by a woman who offered unsolicited advice about managing a household, and once by a man who made a joke about Parsons' loss being Turner's gain. She smiled through all of it, but by the time she reached the wagon where Caleb was loading supplies, her face hurt from the effort. That bad? He asked, reading her expression. Just a lot of opinions from people who don't know me. Welcome to small-town life. He helped her up onto the seat. It'll die down once they find something new to gossip about. I'm not holding my breath. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon creaking over frozen ruts. Then Caleb spoke again. You having second thoughts? No? Are you? No. But I worry you might be taking on more than you bargained for. The ranch, the kids, the town gossip. Caleb. Naomi turned to look at him. I'm not some delicate flower who needs protecting from reality. I know what I'm getting into. Do you, though? Because once we're married, there's no easy way out. Divorce is not something I'm planning to need. She kept her voice firm. Stop waiting for me to run. I'm here. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. All right. Sorry. Don't apologize. Just trust me. I'm trying. Then try harder. Despite the tension, Caleb smiled. Yes, ma'am. No. They were married on the first Sunday in March, in the small church on the edge of town. The ceremony was simple. Just Reverend Michaels, the kids, Mrs. Patterson as witness, and a handful of neighbors who genuinely wished them well. Naomi wore the same dress she'd worn to meet Parsons, because it was the only nice thing she owned, but Emma had woven wildflowers into her hair that morning, and somehow that made it feel special. Caleb wore his cleanest shirt and looked terrified. When it came time for vows, his voice shook slightly, but his eyes never left hers. I promise to provide for you, protect you, and honor you as my wife and partner. I promise to be honest, even when it's hard, and to build a life with you that's worth living. Naomi's turn. I promise to stand beside you, work with you, and help raise your children as if they were my own. I promise to be strong when you need strength, and to be honest when you need truth, and to never give up on what we're building together. They exchanged simple bands. His was his original wedding ring from Sarah, which he'd offered awkwardly and Naomi had accepted because she understood that holding on to the past didn't mean you couldn't move forward. Hers was new, a thin band Caleb had traded 3 days' labor for, and it fit perfectly. When Reverend Michaels pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her gently, almost chastely, but with enough feeling that Naomi felt it down to her toes. Emma cheered. Daniel clapped politely. And just like that, Naomi Carter became Naomi Turner, with all the hope and terror that entailed. The small gathering afterward at the Turner homestead was equally simple: coffee, cake that Mrs. Patterson had baked, and conversation that flowed more easily than Naomi expected. People were genuinely happy for them, or at least willing to pretend. And for a few hours, Naomi let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this would work. As the sun started to set and guests began leaving, Emma pulled Naomi aside. "Are you happy?" the girl asked seriously. "Yes." "Are you?" "I think so." "It's different, but good different." Emma fidgeted with her dress. "Will you and Papa have babies?" Naomi felt her face heat. "I don't know. Maybe. Would that bother you?" "No, I think I'd like a little sister," Emma grinned. "Or a brother. Daniel's okay, but he's boring sometimes." "I heard that," Daniel called from across the room. "You were supposed to," Emma called back, then hugged Naomi quickly before running off. Naomi found Caleb on the porch, looking out at the darkening sky. She slipped her hand into his. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Still standing. You?" "Same." They stood like that for a while, not needing words. Then Caleb spoke quietly. "I never thought I'd do this again. Get married, I mean. After Sarah, it felt like that part of my life was over." "Are you glad you did? Ask me in a year. If you haven't run off by then, I'll let you know." But he was smiling, and Naomi smiled back. Fair enough. That night, lying in the bed that had been Caleb's alone for 2 years, Naomi stared at the ceiling and tried to process everything that had changed. She was married, she had children, or something close enough. She had a home that depended on her just as much as she depended on it. Beside her, Caleb's breathing was already evening out into sleep, exhausted from the long day. Naomi turned on her side to watch him, his face relaxed in a way it never was when he was awake, younger and less burdened. She'd done it. She'd gambled everything on a place and people she barely knew, and now there was no going back. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like relief. Morning came too early, as it always did on the ranch. Naomi woke to the sound of Caleb already moving around the house, boots heavy on the wooden floor, the stove door clanging as he started the fire. She lay there for a moment, adjusting to the weight of the ring on her finger, and the strange reality that this was now her life. Not temporary, not borrowed, but hers. By the time she made it to the kitchen, Caleb had coffee brewing and was attempting to fry eggs without burning them. The attempt was noble, but doomed. "Let me," Naomi said, taking the spatula from his hand. "I can cook." "You can burn things while intending to cook. It's different." She scraped the charred eggs into the scrap bucket and started fresh. "Go wake the kids." He looked like he might argue, then just nodded and left. Naomi worked quickly, preparing a proper breakfast. Eggs that weren't rubber, biscuits from the dough she'd prepared the night before, even some preserved jam she'd found in the back of the cupboard. Small things, but they mattered. Emma appeared first, her hair a bird's nest and her nightgown twisted. "Mama Naomi, I'm hungry." The name still caught Naomi off guard, but she was getting used to it. "Wash your hands and face first. You look like you wrestled a bear." "I did. His name is Daniel, and he snores." "I do not." Daniel emerged from the other room, indignant. "You're the one who kicks in your sleep." "Children," Caleb said mildly, but there was amusement in his voice. "Truce until after breakfast." They settled around the table, the 4 of them, and for a moment Naomi just watched. This strange little family she'd somehow become part of. Emma chattered about a dream she'd had. Daniel corrected her logic with the patience of someone who'd been doing it his whole life. Caleb ate steadily, occasionally catching Naomi's eye with a look that made her stomach flutter. This was marriage. Not the romantic fantasies she'd once imagined as a girl, but something more real. Morning chaos and burnt coffee, and the knowledge that this was just the first of thousands of mornings to come. After breakfast, Caleb headed out to deal with the livestock while Naomi cleaned up and got the children started on their lessons. Emma could read basic words now, and Daniel was working through arithmetic that frequently frustrated him to the point of throwing his slate. "I don't see why I need to know this," he complained. "When am I ever going to use long division on a ranch?" When you're figuring out how to divide seed between fields, or calculating yield per acre, or working out how much you can sell your cattle for. Naomi kept her voice patient. Numbers matter, Daniel. They're how you make sure people don't cheat you. He considered this, then picked up his slate again. Fine, but I still don't like it. Nobody said you had to like it. Just do it. Around midday, a wagon pulled up outside. Mrs. Henshaw, the woman who supposedly ran the burned-down boarding house, along with her daughter Margaret. Naomi met them on the porch, wiping flour from her hands. Mrs. Turner, Mrs. Henshaw said with a tight smile. Thought we'd stop by and welcome you properly to the community. That's kind of you. Naomi didn't miss the way Margaret was already peering past her into the house, cataloging everything. Would you like to come in? They did, and for the next hour, Naomi endured what was clearly a reconnaissance mission disguised as a social call. Mrs. Henshaw asked pointed questions about how she was managing the household, whether Caleb was treating her well, if the children were being difficult. Margaret, who was maybe 20 and clearly had thoughts about Caleb Turner, kept glancing around like she was taking inventory. It must be quite an adjustment, Mrs. Henshaw said, accepting tea that Naomi had brewed stronger than necessary. Going from being rejected by one man to marrying another so quickly. Emma, who'd been playing quietly in the corner, looked up sharply. Naomi felt heat rise in her face, but she kept her voice level. It was an adjustment, but I'm managing just fine. Of course, dear. Though people do talk, you understand, about the speed of things, the circumstances. Mrs. Henshaw sipped her tea with a prim expression. William Parsons is still quite sore about the whole affair. Says you misrepresented yourself in your letters. William Parsons is a fool who wouldn't know a good thing if it bit him. The words were out before Naomi could stop them. And if people want to talk, they should find something more interesting to discuss than my marriage. Mrs. Henshaw's eyebrows shot up. Margaret looked scandalized, but Emma was grinning from her corner. Well, Mrs. Henshaw said stiffly, I can see you're settling in with your own views on things. I am. Thank you for stopping by. It was a dismissal, barely polite, and Mrs. Henshaw recognized it as such. She and Margaret left in a flurry of tight smiles and meaningful looks, and Naomi closed the door behind them with more force than necessary. I like you, Emma announced. You don't let people be mean. Your mama, Naomi started, then stopped. Did your mother let people be mean? Sometimes. She said it was easier to just smile and agree. Emma came over and slipped her hand into Naomi's. But I don't think that's true. I think people just get meaner when you let them. Out of the mouths of children. Naomi squeezed Emma's hand. You might be right about that. When Caleb came in for dinner that evening, Naomi told him about the visit. He listened with a deepening frown. Mrs. Henshaw's always been a gossip. Her daughter had her eye on this place after Sarah died, thought she might step in. He shook his head. Sorry you had to deal with that. I can handle gossips. Naomi set a plate in front of him. But it made me realize people are going to be watching us, waiting for us to fail. So we can't give them the satisfaction. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, then smiled, that rare, genuine smile that made him look years younger. No, we can't. March slid into early April, and with it came the slow, grudging thaw that marked the beginning of spring in Montana. The snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass and mud and all the winter damage that had been hidden. The roof had 3 new leaks. The chicken coop had partially collapsed on one side, and the north fence line was down in at least 4 places. The work was overwhelming. Caleb attacked it with grim determination, up before dawn and working until he could barely stand. Naomi did what she could, feeding chickens, helping with repairs she was strong enough to manage, keeping the household running. But there were moments when the sheer scale of what they were trying to accomplish felt impossible. One afternoon, while Caleb was wrestling with fence posts and Naomi was hanging laundry that would probably freeze before it dried, a rider appeared on the horizon. He approached slowly, and as he got closer, Naomi recognized him, William Parsons. Her stomach dropped. She set down the laundry basket and walked to meet him, very aware that Caleb was 50 yards away and wouldn't hear if she called. Parsons dismounted, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Turner. Mr. Parsons. She kept her voice neutral. What brings you here? Curiosity, mostly. He looked past her at the house, the sagging barn, the general air of barely controlled chaos. Wanted to see what you chose over me. I didn't choose this over you. You threw me away. And this is what I built from the pieces. Built? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're living in poverty with a man who can barely keep his land and 2 children who aren't yours. That's not building. That's settling. Naomi felt anger rise hot and fast. You know nothing about my life. I know you could have gone back east, found something better than this. He gestured dismissively at the ranch. Instead, you're here, playing house with a widower who's one bad season away from losing everything. Better a widower who sees my worth than a man who judges people like livestock. Naomi stepped closer, her voice low and fierce. You want to know what I chose? I chose a man who respects me, children who need me, a life that matters, even if it's hard. What did you choose, Mr. Parsons? An empty house and the satisfaction of being right? Parsons' face reddened. You're going to regret this. When winter comes again and you're freezing and hungry and wondering why you threw away a comfortable life, I'll remember that I chose myself over your comfort. Now get off our land. Mrs. Turner, I said get off our land. Naomi's voice carried now, and she saw Caleb drop his post and start walking toward them, his expression dangerous. Parsons saw him too. He mounted his horse with deliberate slowness, his eyes hard. You could have had security. Instead, you have this. I have everything I need. Naomi didn't back down, didn't look away. More than you ever offered. He rode off without another word, and Caleb reached Naomi just as she started shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. What did he want? Caleb's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. To gloat. To make me feel small. Naomi wrapped her arms around herself. To prove he was right to reject me. And what did you tell him? That he was a fool who missed out on the best thing that could have happened to him. She looked up at Caleb. Was that too much? Not nearly enough. He pulled her against him, and Naomi let herself lean into his solid warmth. He comes back. He deals with me. I handled it. I know you did, but you shouldn't have to. Caleb pressed his face into her hair. You're mine now, and I protect what's mine. The possessiveness should have bothered her. Instead, it felt like safety. That night, lying in bed while Caleb slept beside her, Naomi stared at the ceiling and tried to process the encounter. Parsons had wanted to hurt her, to make her doubt her choices. And for a moment, just a moment, he'd succeeded. Because he wasn't entirely wrong. The ranch was struggling, money was tight, their future was uncertain at best. But then she thought about Emma's laugh, and Daniel's careful trust, and the way Caleb looked at her like she hung the moon. And she thought about how Parsons' security had come with the price of being someone she wasn't, of fitting into a mold that would have slowly suffocated her. She'd rather struggle with people who loved her than be comfortable with someone who didn't. The thought settled something in her chest. She turned on her side, watching Caleb's face in the darkness, and made a silent promise. To herself, to him, to the life they were building. She wouldn't let doubt win. Not Parsons' doubt, not the town's doubt, not even her own. They would make this work. Somehow. Spring brought warmer weather and longer days, but it also brought new challenges. The fence repairs took weeks, with Caleb teaching Daniel how to set posts properly, while Naomi and Emma handled the garden planting. They were racing against time. Get the seeds in now or lose the growing season. Get the fences up now or lose the livestock to wandering or predators. One particularly frustrating afternoon, Caleb came in from the north pasture with blood on his hands and murder in his eyes. Lost another calf, he said flatly. Coyotes got it before I could get the fence finished. Naomi looked up from the bread she was kneading. How many does that make? 3 this month. We can't afford to lose any more. Then we finished the fence. All of us. She wiped flour from her hands. The garden can wait another day. Naomi, you don't... I can lift posts and string wire just fine. So can Emma if we give her the lighter work. She was already reaching for her coat. We do this together, or we don't do it at all. For a moment, Caleb looked like he might argue. Then he just nodded, exhausted and grateful. All right, together. They worked until dark, all 4 of them, even Emma, who carried tools and water and provided encouragement in equal measure. By the time they finished, Naomi's hands were blistered and her back screamed, but the fence was up, sturdy and straight, and a small victory against the land that seemed determined to break them. That night, soaking her hands in cold water while Caleb did the same, Naomi caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked.
Nothing, just thinking.
"About?" "About how I got lucky. Luckier than I deserved." He flexed his sore fingers. "Sarah couldn't have done what you did today. Hell, most men couldn't have." "I'm not most men." "No, you're better." He said it simply, like a fact, and Naomi felt warmth spread through her chest. "You're not so bad yourself, Caleb Turner." High praise. "Take it while you can get it." He laughed, and the sound filled the small kitchen like light. Bama. But not everything was getting better. Money remained desperately tight, and as spring progressed towards summer, it became clear they might not have enough to buy the supplies they needed for the coming year. Caleb spent more and more time with the account books, his face growing grimmer each time. One evening in late April, he finally admitted the extent of the problem. "We're not going to make it through another winter, not unless something changes." He stared at the numbers like they might rearrange themselves into something more hopeful. "I can sell some cattle early, take a loss, but even that might not be enough." Naomi looked at the columns of figures, the debts and expenses, and the pitiful income. "What about taking on extra work, in town, I mean?" "Doing what? There's barely enough work for the people already there. What if I taught? School's out for summer, but there are families who'd pay for their children to keep learning." She was thinking out loud now, the idea forming as she spoke. "Or I could take in sewing, laundry, anything that brings in a little extra. I won't have my wife working herself to death. Our options are me working or us losing the ranch. Pick one." Naomi's voice was sharp with frustration. "I'm not some delicate thing that needs protecting, Caleb. I'm your partner, and partners pull their weight." "You already pull more than your weight. Then I'll pull more. We both will. Because the alternative is giving up, and I'm not doing that." She grabbed his hand, forcing him to look at her. "Are you?" "No." "Then we figure it out, together, remember?" He nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Together." Chat. The next week, Naomi made the rounds in town, offering tutoring services to families whose children had fallen behind or needed extra help. She got 3 students immediately: the blacksmith's daughter, who struggled with reading, the doctor's son, who couldn't seem to grasp arithmetic, and a rancher's youngest, who just needed someone patient to work with him. She held lessons in the afternoons after her ranch work was done, charging modest rates that families could afford. It wasn't much, maybe $5 a week total, but it was something. More importantly, it gave her a presence in town beyond that woman Parsons rejected. She was Naomi Turner, teacher. It felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. The children were a mixed lot. Sarah Blackwood, the blacksmith's daughter, was eager but dyslexic, her letters jumbling no matter how hard she tried. Thomas Morrison, the doctor's boy, was brilliant but lazy, coasting on natural ability until it ran out. And little Pete Walker was just slow, not stupid, but needing someone who wouldn't give up on him. Naomi worked with each one individually, finding what made them tick, what helped them learn. And slowly, they all started to improve. Word spread. By early May, she had 6 students. By June, 8. The money wasn't life-changing, but it took the edge off the desperation that had been choking them. More than that, it gave Naomi something that was hers. Not the ranch, not the children, not even Caleb, but her own competence and value in the community. People started greeting her by name in the street. Mothers thanked her for their children's progress. She was becoming part of the town's fabric, not despite her history with Parsons, but beyond it. One afternoon, while Naomi was working with Thomas on his multiplication tables, Margaret Henshaw appeared at the Turner house with her mother. They'd brought a basket of preserves and what looked like forced smiles. "Mrs. Turner," Mrs. Henshaw began, "we heard you were tutoring and thought perhaps Margaret might assist. She's quite good with children." Naomi looked at Margaret, who was already eyeing the house and garden with that same cataloging expression. "That's kind, but I'm managing fine on my own." "Oh, but surely with so many students you could use help. Margaret could—" "I said I'm managing." Naomi kept her voice pleasant but firm. "Thank you for the offer, though." Mrs. Henshaw's smile tightened. "Well, if you change your mind. If you change." After they left, Thomas, who'd been pretending to work but clearly listening, looked up. "She just wants to spy on you." "Thomas!" "What? Everyone knows. The Henshaws have been trying to figure out what Mr. Turner sees in you since you got married. He said it matter-of-factly, without malice. My ma says it's because you're not from here, and people don't trust what they don't know. And what do you think? Thomas considered this seriously. I think you're the first teacher who didn't make me feel stupid when I got something wrong, so I don't really care what people say. Naomi felt her throat tighten. Thank you, Thomas. That means a lot. You're welcome. Can we take a break now? My brain hurts. She laughed. Yes, we can take a break. Buttercup. As summer deepened, the ranch slowly stabilized. The garden was producing, the cattle were healthy, and Naomi's tutoring money covered the small expenses that had been slowly drowning them. It wasn't prosperity, but it was survival, and survival felt like victory. Caleb was changing too, in subtle ways. He smiled more, laughed at the children's jokes, and started teaching Daniel advanced ranching skills with something approaching patience. At night, he and Naomi would sit on the porch after the kids were asleep, talking about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, the small frustrations and joys of their days. One warm evening in July, with the sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Caleb turned to Naomi with an expression that made her breath catch. I need to tell you something, he said. Her stomach clenched. That sounds ominous. It's not. It's just... He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was struggling for words. When I married you, it was practical. A solution to a problem. I cared about you, yeah, but it wasn't... I didn't... Caleb, you're making this worse. I know. I'm trying to say that somewhere along the way it stopped being practical. He met her eyes. I love you, Naomi. Not because you're useful, or because you're good with the kids, or because you saved this ranch, but because you're you. And I needed you to know that. Naomi felt tears prick her eyes. You terrible man. Why would you say something like that when I'm all dusty and my hair's a mess? Because it's true right now, and I'm tired of waiting for the perfect moment. He cupped her face in his rough hands. I love you, even when you're dusty. I love you too, even when you're being emotionally constipated. He laughed and kissed her, and Naomi kissed him back with everything she had, all the fear and hope and desperate joy of someone who'd found home in the last place she expected. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. So we're doing this. Really doing this. We've been doing this for months. Yeah, but now we're doing it on purpose. Naomi laughed, the sound bright and free. On purpose. I like that. They sat like that until the stars came out, wrapped in each other, and the knowledge that what they'd built was real, messy and hard, and absolutely real. But of course, life never stayed simple for long. In early August, a letter arrived from back east, from Naomi's cousin Martha, the one who'd made it clear Naomi wasn't welcome after her parents died. The letter was brief and to the point. Martha's husband had died suddenly, leaving her with 4 children and no income. She was desperate, alone, and begging for help. Naomi read the letter 3 times, her emotions a tangled mess. Part of her wanted to throw it in the fire. Martha hadn't cared when Naomi was desperate and alone. But another part, the part that remembered being 19 and terrified with nowhere to go, couldn't quite manage that level of cruelty. She showed the letter to Caleb that night, after the children were asleep. What do you want to do? He asked carefully. I don't know. Part of me says she made her bed, but part of me remembers what it was like to be in her position. She wasn't kind to you from what you've said. No, she wasn't. Naomi folded the letter, her hands shaking slightly. But I'm not her. And I don't want to be the kind of person who turns my back when someone's drowning, even if they pushed me under first. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. We don't have much to spare. I know, but if you want to send her something, help her get on her feet, I won't stop you. He took her hand. It's your money you earned. Your choice. Naomi looked at their joined hands, his scarred and calloused, hers blistered from work and teaching. What if I brought her here? Here? Just temporarily, until she can figure out what to do next. The idea was forming even as she spoke. She could help with the house, the garden, and maybe I could teach her how to survive without a man to depend on. That's a big maybe and a big risk. Caleb's expression was serious. You sure you want someone from your past here, seeing how we live? She's family. Bad family, but still family. Naomi squeezed his hand.
And maybe I need to prove to myself that I really have moved on, that her opinion doesn't matter anymore. Or maybe you're setting yourself up to get hurt again. Maybe, but I have to try. Caleb studied her face, then nodded slowly. All right, if this is what you want, we'll make it work. But she hurts you, she's gone. No second chances. Deal.
Naomi wrote back that night, offering Martha and her children a place to stay temporarily, while Martha figured out her next steps. It felt like taking a gamble on someone who'd already proven untrustworthy, but it also felt like the right thing to do. Not for Martha, but for the person Naomi wanted to be. The reply came 3 weeks later. Martha and her 4 children would arrive in early September. Naomi had 6 weeks to prepare the house, the family, and herself for a confrontation with her past. She tried not to think of it as a mistake. But late at night, staring at the ceiling while Caleb slept beside her, she couldn't quite shake the feeling that she'd just opened a door that should have stayed closed. Gwashik. Preparation for Martha's arrival consumed the last weeks of summer. Caleb and Daniel built a partition in the barn's loft, creating a rough but serviceable space for Martha and her children. Naomi sewed extra bedding from fabric she'd been saving, and Emma helped clean and organize with the intensity of someone preparing for inspection.
What if they don't like us? Emma asked one afternoon while scrubbing the kitchen floor. Then they don't have to stay, Naomi said. But we're offering them help when they need it. That's what matters. But what if they're mean to you? Papa said your cousin wasn't nice. Naomi paused in her work, considering how to explain complicated family dynamics to a 9-year-old. Sometimes people are mean because they're scared or hurting, and sometimes they're just mean. But either way, we treat them with basic decency, not because they deserve it, but because we do.
Emma thought about this, then nodded. Okay, but if they're mean, I'm allowed to be mean back. Emma. What? I'm just saying. Despite everything, Naomi smiled. How about we wait and see what happens before we start planning revenge? Fine, but I'm watching them. Daniel was less vocal about the situation, but no less wary. Why are we helping someone who is mean to you? He asked Caleb while they worked on the loft. Because your mother, because Naomi, is a better person than most. Caleb hammered a nail with more force than necessary. And because sometimes doing the right thing means helping people who don't deserve it. That seems stupid. It is, but it's also what makes us different from people like Martha. He looked at his son seriously. You remember that, Daniel. The measure of a person isn't how they treat people who've been good to them. It's how they treat people who haven't. Daniel nodded slowly, processing this. So we're being the bigger people. Something like that. I still think it's stupid. You're not wrong. Martha arrived on the first Monday in September, looking older and more worn than Naomi remembered. Her 4 children ranged from 12 down to 4, 2 boys and 2 girls, all thin and quiet and clearly exhausted from the journey. The reunion was awkward. Martha's eyes swept over the modest ranch, the simple house, the evidence of hard work and harder living. Her expression said everything her words didn't: disappointment, judgment, a hint of vindication. So this is what you chose, Martha said, echoing Parsons' words in a way that made Naomi's stomach clench. This is what I built. Naomi kept her voice even. Come inside, you must be tired. They got Martha and her children settled, Emma and Daniel watching the newcomers with wary curiosity. The youngest girl, barely 4, cried for her father until she exhausted herself and fell asleep. The oldest boy kept asking questions about where they were and how long they'd be staying. Martha just sat at the table, drinking tea Naomi had made, her face a mask of barely concealed misery. That night, after everyone was finally asleep, Caleb found Naomi on the porch, staring out at the darkness. You all right? He asked. I don't know. Seeing her here, seeing her judge everything, Naomi's voice broke slightly. It makes me feel small again, like that girl she took in and made feel like a burden. You're not that girl anymore. I know, but knowing it and feeling it are different things. Caleb wrapped his arms around her from behind, solid and warm. You want me to throw her out? No, but ask me again in a week. He chuckled against her hair. Fair enough. The first few days were tense. Martha helped with chores, but did so with an air of martyrdom, like every task was beneath her. Her children were better, quiet and polite, clearly used to making themselves small. Naomi found herself drawn to them, especially the youngest girl, Lucy, who reminded her painfully of Emma at her most vulnerable. Daniel and Emma were less forgiving. They treated Martha's family with distant politeness, but there was no warmth there, no welcome. And when Martha made a comment about how Emma's table manners needed work, Daniel actually stepped between them. "She eats just fine," he said coldly, "and this is her house, not yours." Martha's face reddened. "I was simply trying to help." "We don't need your help. You need ours, so maybe don't criticize." He turned and walked out, leaving Martha sputtering. Naomi found him in the barn later, brushing down one of the horses with unnecessary vigor. "That was rude," she said mildly. "She was rude first." "True." Naomi leaned against the stall. "But we're trying to be better than that, remember?" "I don't like her. She looks at you like you're dirt." Daniel's voice was fierce. "And she looks at this place like it's not good enough. But it is good enough. It's ours, and we worked for it. And she has no right." "Daniel!" Naomi waited until he looked at her. "Thank you for defending us, but I can handle Martha." "Can you?" "Because you let her say things that make you flinch." "He wasn't wrong." Naomi sighed. "I'm working on it. Give me time." "Okay, but if she keeps being mean, I'm not promising to be nice." "I wouldn't expect you to." That seemed to satisfy him. He went back to brushing the horse, and Naomi stood there thinking about how much he'd grown. Not just physically, but in the way he saw the world and protected the people he loved. When had she become someone he loved enough to defend? The realization made her eyes sting. A week into Martha's stay, things came to a head. Naomi had been teaching her afternoon students when she returned to find Martha and Caleb in a heated argument in the yard. "Telling you she's wasting her time," Martha was saying, "teaching other people's children when she should be focusing on her own responsibilities here." "Her teaching brings in money we need," Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And what she does with her time is her business, not yours. I'm family. I have a right to—" "You're a guest, and guests don't tell the lady of the house how to run things." Naomi stepped forward before it could escalate further. "What's going on?" Martha turned to her, frustration evident. "I'm trying to make you see sense." "You're spreading yourself too thin, Naomi. This ranch, those children, teaching in town, something's going to break. The only thing breaking is my patience." Naomi set down her teaching bag with deliberate care. "You've been here a week, Martha. 1 week. And in that time, you've criticized my house, my family, my choices, and my work. I invited you here because you needed help, not because I needed your approval." "I'm trying to help you." "No. You're trying to make yourself feel superior by pointing out everything you think is wrong with my life." Naomi's voice was shaking now, but with anger, not fear. "Well, here's the truth. My life is hard. It's uncertain and scary and nowhere near perfect. But it's mine. I built it from nothing after you made it clear I was nothing, so forgive me if I don't value your opinion." Martha's face went white, then red. "I took you in when your parents died. You gave me a roof and made me feel like I should be grateful for every scrap of kindness. You never let me forget I was a charity case." Naomi stepped closer. "But I'm not that girl anymore. I'm Naomi Turner. I have a husband who loves me, children who depend on me, students who respect me, and a community where I matter." "What do you have, Martha, besides judgment and bitterness?" The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Martha's children had emerged from the barn, watching with wide eyes. Emma and Daniel stood on the porch, frozen. "I think," Martha said finally, her voice trembling, "that it's time for us to go." "I think you're right." Naomi's anger was draining now, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "But I'll still help you get to wherever you're going next. Not because you deserve it, because I'm better than you made me think I was." Martha gathered her children that evening, and by the next morning they were gone, headed to a cousin in Oregon who'd agreed to take them in. The goodbyes were strained and brief. Only Lucy cried, clinging to Naomi until her mother pulled her away. After they left, the house felt emptier and fuller at the same time. Emptier of people, but fuller of relief. Caleb found Naomi in the garden that afternoon, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. "You okay?" he asked, I told off my cousin, I made her leave. You set boundaries with someone who was disrespecting you. Different thing. Naomi sat back on her heels, dirt on her hands and face. Why do I feel bad about it then? Because you're human, and humans feel bad even when they do the right thing. Caleb crouched beside her. But you were right. She was making you smaller, and you're done being small. When did you get so wise?
I married you. That requires a certain level of intelligence. He grinned, and despite everything, Naomi laughed. That night, gathered around the dinner table with just their family, no guests, no outsiders, Emma looked at Naomi with serious eyes. You're not going to leave us, are you? She asked. Like Martha left? Never. I'm staying right here. Naomi reached across the table and took Emma's hand. This is my home. You're my family. Nothing's going to change that. Emma relaxed visibly. Daniel nodded, satisfied. And Caleb squeezed Naomi's other hand under the table, silent support and affirmation all at once. Later, lying in bed while Caleb's breathing evened into sleep, Naomi thought about everything that had happened. Martha's visit had been hard, had reopened old wounds and created new tensions, but it had also proved something important. Naomi wasn't that scared, desperate girl anymore. She'd found her strength, her voice, her place, and she was never going back. September brought cooler nights and the first hints of autumn color in the distant mountains. With Martha gone, the house settled back into its rhythm, work and meals and the small conversations that made up a life. But something had shifted in Naomi. The confrontation with her cousin had burned away the last remnants of the girl who'd stepped off that stage 9 months ago, uncertain and desperate. What remained was harder, clearer, more certain of her own worth. Caleb noticed. You're different, he said one evening while they worked side by side in the barn, mucking out stalls in the fading light. How? Taller, somehow, like you finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. He leaned on his pitchfork, studying her. It's good, just different. Naomi considered this. I spent so long trying to be what other people wanted. My cousin, Parsons, even you at first. But telling Martha off, watching her leave, not feeling guilty about it, she paused, searching for words. It was like cutting loose the last rope holding me to who I used to be. And who are you now? Someone who knows what she's worth. Someone who won't settle for less. She met his eyes. Someone who chooses to be here because she wants to, not because she has nowhere else to go. Caleb set down the pitchfork and crossed to her, his hand settling on her waist. I'm glad you choose to be here. Even when I'm bossy and stubborn? Especially then. He kissed her, brief and warm, then pulled back with a grin. Though you could be less stubborn about admitting when I'm right. That would require you to actually be right occasionally. I'm right all the time, you just don't notice. Naomi laughed and pushed him away, returning to her work. But the warmth lingered, settling into her chest like sunlight. As fall deepened, Naomi's tutoring work expanded again. The town was growing, new families arriving every week, drawn by land grants and the promise of opportunity. With growth came children who needed education, and Naomi found herself teaching 12 students now, sometimes more. The money was better than she'd expected, enough that she and Caleb were able to pay down some of their debts and even save a small cushion against winter. But more than the money, the teaching gave Naomi something she hadn't realized she'd been craving. Respect that had nothing to do with being someone's wife or mother or helper. She was valued for her own skills, her own knowledge. One afternoon in late September, Dr. Morrison stopped by the ranch while Naomi was working with the children on their lessons. He waited until she finished, then approached with a proposition. Mrs. Turner, I'll get right to it. The town's growing faster than anyone expected, and we need a proper school. The territorial government's offering funding, but we need a qualified teacher to make it happen. He adjusted his spectacles. I'd like to recommend you for the position. Naomi blinked, certain she'd misheard. A real school? With a building and everything? Well, it'd start in the church basement until we can build something proper. But yes, a real school, regular salary, curriculum, the works. Morrison smiled. You've proven yourself capable, and the families trust you. That counts for more than formal credentials out here. I don't have formal credentials. Neither did half the doctors I trained with, but we all figured it out. He waved this away. The question is, are you interested? Naomi's mind raced.
A real teaching position meant security, independence, a future that wasn't entirely dependent on the ranch's uncertain fortunes. But it also meant more time away from home, more responsibility, more visibility in a community that still had people like Mrs. Henshaw watching and judging. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. The board meets next week. Let me know by then." Morrison tipped his hat. "You'd be good at it, Mrs. Turner. Don't let fear talk you out of it." After he left, Naomi stood in the yard, her thoughts churning. Emma appeared at her elbow, having clearly been eavesdropping. "Are you going to do it?" Emma asked. "I don't know. It's a big decision. But you love teaching, and you're good at it." Emma looked up at her with absolute certainty. "You should do it. What about here? The ranch needs work, and you and Daniel need— We need you to be happy, and teaching makes you happy." Emma said it so simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Papa always says people do their best work when they're doing what they love. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just finally noticed." Naomi laughed and pulled Emma into a hug. "I'll think about it, okay?" "Okay, but you should say yes." That evening, Naomi brought it up with Caleb while they were preparing dinner. She expected resistance, maybe even jealousy that she'd be focusing on work outside the home. Instead, he listened carefully, then nodded. "You should do it." "Just like that?" "Why not? You're good at teaching. It pays decent, and it's something you want." He chopped vegetables with methodical precision. "The ranch will manage. We'll figure it out. But the extra work will fall on you, Naomi." He set down the knife and turned to face her. "You spent months helping me keep this place together. You worked until your hands bled and never complained. You've earned the right to do something for yourself. This isn't just about me, though. It affects all of us. And we're telling you to do it, all of us." He gestured toward the other room where the children were playing. "Those two have been campaigning for you to take the job since Morrison left. Daniel even offered to take over some of your morning chores." Naomi felt her throat tighten. "I don't deserve you. Any of you." "Yeah, you do. You just spent so long being told you didn't that you forgot." Caleb pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "Take the job, Naomi. Build something that's yours." So she did. The town school opened the first Monday in October, in the cramped basement of the church that smelled of mildew and old hymnals. Naomi had 15 students that first day, ranging from 6 to 14, all crammed onto makeshift benches with slates and primers. It was chaos, beautiful, exhausting chaos. She'd planned lessons carefully, organized materials, prepared for every contingency. But within an hour, all her plans were in shambles because half the students couldn't read at the level she'd expected. 3 had never been to school at all, and one enterprising 12-year-old tried to start a fight during arithmetic. By lunchtime, Naomi's head was pounding and her voice was raw from trying to be heard over the din. But when the children filed out for their midday break, chattering and laughing and complaining about the work she'd assigned, she felt something click into place. This was where she was meant to be. The first few weeks were brutal. Teaching 12 students individually in her home was nothing compared to managing 15 in a shared space with limited materials and even more limited patience. She made mistakes, pushed too hard on some days, not hard enough on others, misread situations and lost control of the classroom more than once. But she learned, she adapted. She figured out which students needed gentle encouragement and which needed firm boundaries. She learned to recognize the signs that a child was struggling not because they were lazy, but because they were hungry or scared or dealing with problems at home she couldn't begin to address. And slowly the children learned too. Letters became words, words became sentences, numbers began to make sense. The 14-year-old who'd tried to start a fight on the first day started actually doing his work. A shy 6-year-old who'd barely spoken began reading aloud with increasing confidence. It wasn't perfect. Some days Naomi went home exhausted and doubting everything. But other days, the days when a child's face lit up with understanding, when a parent thanked her for their son's progress, when even the difficult students showed up eager to learn, those days made everything worth it. Caleb watched the transformation with something approaching awe. "You're thriving," he said one evening while she graded papers by lamplight. "I'm barely surviving. Same thing sometimes." He sat beside her, looking at the careful marks she was making on each student's work. "You're good at this. Better than you probably realize."
I'm making it up as I go. That's what good teachers do. The bad ones think they know everything already. He picked up one of the papers, a spelling exercise with more mistakes than correct answers. This kid improving? That's Pete Walker. And yes, he's improving, slowly but steadily. Then you're doing your job right.
Naomi set down her pen and leaned against his shoulder.
Thank you for supporting this. I know it makes things harder on you.
It makes things different, not harder. Caleb kissed the top of her head. Besides, watching you come alive when you talk about your students, that's worth any amount of extra work. But of course, not everyone was supportive. Mrs. Henshaw, whose son had been attending Naomi's tutoring sessions, pulled him from the new school within a week, claiming the environment was unsuitable. Margaret Henshaw spread rumors that Naomi was neglecting her family for the sake of her career, and William Parsons, inevitably, had opinions. Naomi encountered him in town one November afternoon, picking up supplies for the school. He was coming out of the land office as she was going in, and there was no avoiding the interaction. "Mrs. Turner," his voice was cold. "I hear you're teaching now." "I am." "How progressive. A married woman with a career." The way he said it made it sound like an accusation. "I suppose your husband doesn't mind being neglected while you play schoolmarm." Naomi felt anger rise hot and fast, but she kept her voice level. "My husband supports my work, and it's not playing, it's a legitimate position with the territorial government. A position you only got because the town's desperate, not because you're qualified." Parsons stepped closer, his expression hard. "You think you've proven something, don't you? That you're more than what I said you were. But everyone can see the truth. You're still just a plain desperate woman who got lucky." For a moment, Naomi was back on that first day, standing in Bennett's general store while Parsons told her she wasn't enough. The humiliation washed over her, fresh and sharp. Then she remembered Martha leaving, remembered Caleb's words about being taller, remembered 15 students who looked at her like she hung the moon. "You're right," she said quietly. "I am lucky. Lucky that you rejected me, because it meant I got to build a life with people who actually see my worth. Lucky that I didn't end up married to a man so small and bitter that he's still trying to hurt a woman who escaped him nearly a year ago." She met his eyes. "I was never plain or desperate, Mr. Parsons. I was just wasted on you." His face went purple with rage, but before he could respond, Naomi walked past him into the land office, her hands shaking but her head high. Inside, the clerk looked up with a knowing expression. "Heard most of that. You all right, Mrs. Turner?" "I'm fine, just need to file a requisition for school supplies." "Coming right up." The clerk pulled out the necessary forms, then added quietly, "For what it's worth, my daughter's in your class. She's learning more in a month with you than she did in a year with the last teacher we had. You're doing good work." The simple validation nearly undid her. Naomi blinked back unexpected tears. "Thank you. That means a lot." When she told Caleb about the encounter that evening, she expected him to be angry. Instead, he laughed, a genuine, delighted sound. "Wasted on you. That's perfect." He pulled her into his arms. "I'm proud of you." "For insulting someone?" "For standing up for yourself without apologizing for it. The old Naomi would have tried to smooth things over, make it better, take the high road." He grinned. "The new Naomi tells people exactly where they can stick their opinions." "Is that a good thing?" "It's a necessary thing. Out here, people will walk all over you if you let them. You're learning not to let them." Naomi thought about this. He wasn't wrong. The frontier demanded a kind of hardness, a willingness to defend what was yours with words or actions, or sometimes both. She was learning to be hard when she needed to be, soft when she could afford it, and strategic about the difference. It was exhausting, but it was also empowering. Winter came early that year, snow falling in earnest by mid-November. The school stayed open despite the cold, with families taking turns providing firewood to keep the basement barely habitable. Naomi taught in her coat most days, her breath fogging as she wrote on the makeshift chalkboard. The children were troopers, showing up even when the weather was brutal, their families recognizing that education might be the only thing that separated their children from a lifetime of brutal labor. Naomi felt the weight of that responsibility every day. These parents were trusting her with their children's futures, and she couldn't afford to fail them. But the strain was starting to show. Between teaching, Managing the household and helping Caleb with ranch work when she could, Naomi was stretched thinner than she'd ever been. She woke up exhausted and went to bed more exhausted. Her patience frayed. She snapped at the children over small things, then felt guilty about it afterward. One particularly brutal December day, when 3 students were absent because of illness and the remaining 12 were restless and difficult, Naomi lost her temper completely. One of the older boys, Jack Peterson, always a troublemaker, had been disrupting the lesson all morning, making jokes and distracting the younger children. When he threw a wad of paper at another student, Naomi finally snapped. "Get out," she said, her voice shaking with anger and exhaustion. Jack blinked, surprised. "What?" "I said get out. Go home. I'm done dealing with you today." "You can't just—" "I can, and I am. You're disrupting the learning of every other student here, and I won't tolerate it anymore. Go." Jack grabbed his coat and left, slamming the door behind him. The remaining students sat in shocked silence. Naomi stood there, breathing hard, realizing she might have just made a terrible mistake. Sending a student home was one thing. Doing it in anger, in front of everyone, was another. That evening, Jack's father, a burly rancher named Thomas Peterson, showed up at the school just as Naomi was closing up. "We need to talk," he said, his expression dark. Naomi's stomach dropped, but she nodded. "Of course. Come in." They sat on the cold benches, the space feeling much larger without the children filling it. Peterson didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Jack says you kicked him out today, in front of everyone." "I did. He was being disruptive and disrespectful, and I'd reached my limit." Naomi kept her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'm sorry it came to that, but I won't let one student ruin the learning environment for 14 others. He's a boy. Boys act up. And teachers discipline them when they do. That's how this works." Peterson's jaw tightened. "You embarrassed him, made him look like a fool in front of the younger kids." "He embarrassed himself by choosing to act like a fool." Naomi met his eyes. "Mr. Peterson, I understand you're angry, but your son has been testing boundaries since the day school opened. Today he crossed a line, and there were consequences. That's not embarrassment, that's accountability." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, Peterson's expression shifted. "You remind me of my wife. She never backed down from an argument either." He sighed. "Jack's been difficult since his mother passed. Acts out, picks fights, pushes to see who'll push back." "I'm sorry about your wife," Naomi said, her anger draining away. "But I can't let grief be an excuse for disrupting an entire classroom. The other students deserve better." "I know." Peterson rubbed his face, suddenly looking older. "What do you want me to do?" "Talk to him, make it clear that behavior has consequences, and tell him if he wants to come back, he needs to be ready to actually participate instead of sabotage." She paused. "I'm not giving up on him, Mr. Peterson, but I need him to meet me halfway." Peterson nodded slowly. "Fair enough. I'll talk to him." "I'll talk." Jack returned to school 3 days later with a stiff apology and a noticeably improved attitude. He still tested boundaries, still pushed back occasionally, but the outright disruption stopped. And more importantly, the other students saw that actions had consequences, even for the biggest and most intimidating among them. When Naomi told Caleb about it that night, he listened thoughtfully. "You handled it right," he said finally. "But you're wearing yourself thin, Naomi. Something's got to give before you break." "I can handle it." "Can you?" "Because you're snapping at the kids here too, and you're not sleeping, and I found you crying in the barn yesterday even though you said you were fine." Naomi felt defensive walls rising. "I said I was fine." "And I said that doesn't make it true." Caleb took her hands. "I'm not criticizing, I'm worried. You're trying to be everything to everyone, teacher, wife, mother, ranch hand. Nobody can sustain that forever." "What am I supposed to do? Quit teaching? Give up the one thing that's mine?" "No. But maybe ask for help, maybe admit when you're overwhelmed instead of trying to power through alone." His voice gentled. "Maybe trust that the people who love you want to make this work as much as you do." Naomi felt something crack in her chest. "I don't know how to ask for help. I've always managed. And look where that's gotten you, exhausted, stressed, crying in barns." He pulled her close. "Let me help. Let the kids help. Let the town help if they offer. You don't have to carry everything alone." "What if I can't do it all? What if I have to choose?" "Then you choose what matters most and let the rest go."
But I don't think it'll come to that. Caleb kissed her forehead. You're stronger than you think. You just need to stop proving it all the time.
That night, lying awake while Caleb slept, Naomi thought about his words. She'd spent so long fighting to prove herself, first to survive, then to belong, then to be valued, that she'd forgotten how to simply exist without constant battle. The exhaustion she felt wasn't just physical. It was the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd never learned to lower their guard. Maybe it was time to learn. The next day, Naomi made a decision. She called a meeting with the families whose children attended school and laid out a proposal. If they wanted the school to succeed long-term, they needed to be more involved. Not just sending their children and paying tuition, but actually participating, helping with materials, taking turns maintaining the space, even occasionally assisting with lessons for students who needed extra help. The response was mixed. Some families jumped at the chance to be involved. Others grumbled about not having time. But enough people stepped up that Naomi suddenly had help she hadn't expected. Mothers who could teach basic reading to the youngest students, fathers who repaired broken benches, even a few older students who helped the younger ones with their work. It wasn't a perfect solution. Coordinating volunteers added its own complications. But it took some of the crushing weight off Naomi's shoulders, and more importantly, it built something she hadn't anticipated: investment. When families were actively participating in the school, they cared more about its success. They showed up more consistently, supported disciplined decisions, even donated extra materials when they could. The school began to feel less like Naomi's sole responsibility and more like a community project. It still required her leadership, her skills, her dedication, but she wasn't carrying it alone anymore. At home, she made changes too. She taught Emma and Daniel more advanced household tasks, trusting them with responsibilities she'd been handling herself. She let Caleb take over the morning chores completely so she could focus on lesson planning. She even, reluctantly, admitted when she was too tired to cook and let Caleb attempt dinner without hovering to fix his mistakes. The food was worse. The house was slightly messier. But Naomi slept better, laughed more, and stopped feeling like she was one bad day away from completely falling apart. You're different again, Caleb observed one evening in late December, watching her grade papers without the usual tension in her shoulders. I'm learning, Naomi said simply. That's all any of us can do. Cheap. Christmas that year was modest but warm. Emma and Daniel made decorations from paper and pine branches. Naomi baked cookies with the last of their sugar. Caleb carved small wooden animals for the children. A horse for Daniel, a rabbit for Emma. They had no guests, no extended family, just the four of them gathered around the fireplace while snow fell thick and quiet outside. Emma sat on the floor, arranging her new rabbit and her old doll into some elaborate scenario. Daniel practiced with his new slingshot, aiming at imaginary targets. Caleb sat beside Naomi on the worn sofa, his arm around her shoulders. You happy? He asked quietly. Naomi considered the question. A year ago, she'd been desperate and alone, rejected and humiliated, with no future and no hope. Now she had a family, a home, work that mattered, and a community that respected her. It wasn't easy. It wasn't secure, but it was real. Yeah, she said. I am. Good. Caleb kissed her temple. That's all I wanted. Emma looked up from her play. Mama Naomi, tell us a story. What kind of story? A happy one, about people who get what they deserve. Naomi thought about this, about the strange journey that had brought her here, about the ways life had a habit of giving you exactly what you needed even when it looked nothing like what you wanted. Once upon a time, she began, there was a woman who thought she wasn't enough. But it turned out she was wrong. She was exactly enough for the people who mattered. And they lived, not happily ever after, because life's not that simple, but contentedly ever after, because they chose to build something real together. That's a weird story, Daniel said. That's a true story, Emma corrected. Naomi smiled. Both of those things can be right at the same time. They sat like that until the fire burned low and the children's eyes grew heavy. Then Caleb carried Daniel to bed while Naomi walked Emma, the four of them settling into the nighttime routine they'd built together, teeth brushed, blankets tucked, quiet goodnights exchanged. Later, in their own bed with winter wind rattling the shutters, Caleb pulled Naomi close. I have something to tell you, he said. Her heart jumped. That sounds ominous. It's not. It's good, I think. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I've been talking to some of the other ranchers about pooling resources next season, sharing equipment, coordinating cattle drives, that kind of thing. If it works, it could mean better prices, less individual risk. That's wonderful. It also means trusting other people, depending on them. His voice was uncertain. I'm not good at that.
Neither was I. But we're learning. Naomi turned to face him in the darkness. Together, right? Together. They fell asleep like that, tangled together against the cold, and Naomi dreamed not of the past or the future, but of the present, solid and real and hers. January brought a cold snap that froze everything solid for 2 straight weeks. School was canceled because the church basement was uninhabitable, even with a fire going. Naomi used the time to catch up on lesson planning and help Caleb with the never-ending ranch work that winter demanded. It was during this frozen interlude that Daniel came to her with a question that had clearly been building for a while. Can I call you Ma? He asked abruptly one morning while they were collecting eggs from the few chickens stubborn enough to still be laying. Naomi almost dropped the basket. You want to call me Ma? Emma calls you Mama Naomi, but that seems too long. He was studying the ground, his face red with more than just cold. Ma feels right, if that's okay. Naomi set down the basket and crouched to his level. Daniel, you can call me whatever feels right to you. You know I'm not trying to replace your mother. I know that. Everyone knows that. He finally looked at her, his eyes serious and old beyond his years. But you are my mother now, the one who's here, the one who helps with homework and makes sure I eat vegetables and tells me when I'm being stupid. His voice cracked slightly. Ma's just shorter than all that. Naomi felt tears threatening. Then yes, Ma is perfect. Daniel nodded, satisfied, and went back to collecting eggs like nothing monumental had just happened. But Naomi stood there for a moment longer, letting the weight of it settle. Ma. She was someone's Ma now. Not because of biology or marriage or obligation, but because of choice, his and hers, freely given. When she told Caleb about it later, he looked simultaneously proud and devastated. He barely talks about Sarah anymore, Caleb said quietly. Some days I worry he's forgetting her. He's not forgetting, he's just making room for both. Naomi took his hand. Children are better at that than adults. They know love doesn't run out just because you give it to more people. You think Sarah would be okay with this? With you? It was the first time he'd asked the question directly. Naomi thought about it carefully before answering. I think Sarah loved her children and wanted them to be happy. And I think she'd rather they have someone who loves them now than spend their whole lives mourning what's gone. She paused. But I also think you're not really asking about Sarah. You're asking if it's okay for you to move on. Caleb's silence confirmed it. It's okay, Naomi said softly. Loving me doesn't mean you didn't love her, it just means you're still alive and choosing to live. Sometimes I feel guilty for being happy. I know, but guilt doesn't honor her memory any more than happiness dishonors it. Naomi squeezed his hand. She's gone, Caleb. We're here, and we get to decide what we do with that. He pulled her close, and they stood like that for a long time, 2 people learning to build a future while respecting a past that would always be part of them. When school resumed in February, Naomi found herself facing a new challenge. The territorial government wanted to inspect the school to determine whether it qualified for continued funding. An inspector would be visiting in March to evaluate the facility, the curriculum, and Naomi's teaching methods. The news sent a spike of anxiety through her. What if they found her lacking? What if her lack of formal credentials finally mattered? What if the school closed and the families had to go back to having no education for their children? She threw herself into preparation, organizing lesson plans, improving materials, drilling the students on their reading and arithmetic until they could perform flawlessly. The children sensed her stress and responded with a mix of increased effort and increased acting out, the way children always did when the adults around them were tense. 2 weeks before the inspection, Jack Peterson, the troublemaker who'd turned into one of her more dedicated students, approached her after class. You're worrying too much, he said bluntly. Excuse me? About the inspector, you're making everyone nervous. He shoved his hands in his pockets. We're doing good. You're a good teacher. Stop acting like we're all going to fail. Naomi stared at him. When did you get wise? Always been wise. You just finally noticed. He grinned, echoing Emma's words from months ago. Just teach like you always do. We'll be fine.
Out of the mouths of troublemakers.
Naomi took a breath and nodded. You're right. Thank you. You're welcome. Can I go now? My pa needs help with the horses. Go. He left, and Naomi sat alone in the empty classroom, thinking about how strange it was that a 14-year-old boy had just given her better advice than she'd been giving herself.
When the inspector finally arrived in mid-March, a stern woman named Mrs. Blackwell with sharp eyes and sharper questions, Naomi was ready. Not because she'd drilled the children into perfection, but because she'd remembered what she was actually doing. Teaching children who needed education, in a community that valued it, with limited resources but unlimited dedication. Mrs. Blackwell spent 2 days observing classes, reviewing materials, and interviewing students. She asked difficult questions, pointed out areas that needed improvement, and made Naomi justify every teaching decision. It was exhausting and nerve-wracking, and by the end of the second day, Naomi was certain she'd failed. Then Mrs. Blackwell called her aside. Mrs. Turner, I'll be frank with you. This facility is substandard, your materials are limited, and your lack of formal training shows in some of your methods. Naomi's heart sank. However, Mrs. Blackwell continued, your students are learning. More than that, they're engaged. They ask questions, they help each other, they actually want to be here. That's rare, especially in frontier schools where children are often just going through the motions. She consulted her notes. Your reading scores are above average. Your arithmetic scores are adequate. And more importantly, you've built a community investment in education that most established schools would envy. So the school will continue to receive funding, with the recommendation that you attend a teacher training course this summer, if one becomes available. Mrs. Blackwell's stern expression softened slightly. You're doing good work, Mrs. Turner. Don't let the limitations of your situation make you doubt that. After she left, Naomi sat in the empty classroom and cried. Not from relief, though there was that, but from the validation she hadn't realized she'd been desperately craving. Someone with authority and expertise had looked at her work and declared it good. Not perfect, not without room for improvement, but good. When she told Caleb that evening, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing. I told you you were good at this. You're required to think that. You're my husband. I'd think it even if I wasn't. You're brilliant, Naomi Turner, and it's about time everyone else figured that out too. That night, for the first time in months, Naomi slept deeply and dreamlessly, exhausted but content in a way she'd never quite felt before. Spring arrived in earnest that year, earlier than expected, and with a gentleness that felt almost like an apology for the brutal winter. The snow melted in steady streams rather than sudden floods, the grass emerged green and eager, and the sun stayed warm enough to make work outside almost pleasant. Naomi found herself standing in the garden one April morning, hands in the soil, and realizing she'd stopped bracing for the next disaster. Somewhere along the way, waiting for things to fall apart had become simply living. Emma appeared at her elbow with a basket of seeds. Ma says we should plant these today. It took Naomi a moment to realize Emma was talking about her. Ma. The name still caught her off guard sometimes, a gift she hadn't expected and didn't entirely feel worthy of. But Emma said it so naturally now, like it had always been that way, like Naomi had always been hers. Ma's right, Naomi said, taking the basket. Let's get started. They worked side by side, Emma chattering about school gossip and a bird's nest she'd found, and 100 other small things that made up a child's world. Naomi listened with half her attention, the rest focused on the rhythm of planting: dig, drop, cover, water. Simple work, but satisfying in a way that teaching never quite was. Teaching required constant thought, constant adjustment. Gardening just required patience and faith that things would grow if you gave them what they needed. Daniel appeared an hour later, followed by Caleb, who'd been checking fence lines since dawn. The boy had shot up over winter, suddenly all angles and gangly limbs, his voice cracking at unpredictable moments. He was turning into someone new right before their eyes. Not quite a child anymore, not yet a man, caught in that uncomfortable middle ground where everything felt wrong and nothing fit quite right. Pa says we can ride to town later, Daniel announced. If you need supplies for school. I do, actually. Naomi brushed dirt from her hands. And we should probably pick up seeds for the back field. The ones we ordered should be ready. I want to come, Emma said immediately.
You have lessons this afternoon. But it's Saturday, which is why you have lessons. School days are for other people's children. Saturdays are for making sure you and your brother don't fall behind. Naomi softened the words with a smile. You can come next time.
Emma pouted but didn't argue. She'd learned that when Naomi made a decision, pushing didn't change it. It just made everyone tired. The ride to town was quiet and comfortable, the kind of silence that came from people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. Naomi watched the landscape roll past, familiar now after more than a year, but still capable of surprising her with its harsh beauty. The mountains in the distance were losing their snowcaps, revealing dark rock beneath. Hawks circled overhead, riding thermals. The grass rippled in waves that looked almost like water. You ever regret it? Caleb asked suddenly. Coming here, I mean. Staying. Naomi considered the question. A year ago, she would have answered too quickly, too eager to prove she'd made the right choice. Now she could afford to be honest. Sometimes, she said, when it's hard, when I'm tired, when people like Mrs. Henshaw make their little comments, but regret and wishing things were easier aren't the same thing. She looked at him. Do you regret asking me to stay? Never. Not once. He said it with such certainty that Naomi felt warmth spread through her chest. You saved us, Naomi. Me and the kids both. We were drowning and didn't even know it. I didn't save anyone. We saved each other. She reached over and squeezed his hand. That's how it works, I think. When it's real. They lapsed back into silence, but it felt different now, weighted with things said and things understood without needing words. Town was busier than usual, crowded with spring travelers and families coming in from outlying ranches. Naomi recognized most of the faces now, could put names to the ones that mattered. Mrs. Patterson waved from the boarding house porch. Dr. Morrison tipped his hat as he passed. Even Pearl, who'd sent her toward a burned-down boarding house that first terrible day, offered a genuine smile. At Bennett's General Store, Mr. Bennett had their seed order ready, along with the letter that had arrived for Naomi. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Martha. You want to read that now? Caleb asked, noting her expression. Later. Naomi tucked the letter into her coat pocket. Let's get what we came for first. But the letter weighed on her mind as they collected supplies and exchanged pleasantries with neighbors. Martha hadn't written since leaving last fall, and Naomi had assumed that silence meant the door between them was closed for good. Apparently not. On the ride home, with the supplies loaded and the sun starting its descent, Naomi finally opened the envelope. The letter was brief, written in Martha's careful hand. Naomi, I owe you an apology, a real one, not the half-hearted excuses I made when I left. You were right about me. I was bitter and small and taking it out on you because I couldn't stand seeing you succeed where I'd failed. I'm in Oregon now with our cousin Helen. She's kinder than I was, thank goodness. The children are settling in. I'm learning to manage on my own, though it's harder than I expected. You made it look easy, building a life from nothing. It's not, but I'm trying. Anyway, I wanted you to know I'm sorry for how I treated you after your parents died, for judging your choices, for making you feel less than you are. You were never the problem, Naomi. I was. I hope you're happy. I hope that husband of yours knows how lucky he is. Martha. Naomi read it twice, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. The apology felt genuine, which somehow made it harder to process than if it had been defensive or insincere. She'd spent so long being angry at Martha, using that anger as fuel, that she wasn't quite sure what to do now that it was being diffused. Good news or bad? Caleb asked. Neither, just unexpected. She folded the letter. Martha apologized. A real apology. Huh. Didn't see that coming. Neither did I. Naomi stared at the letter for another moment, then tucked it away. I think I'm glad she sent it, but I don't know if I'll write back. You don't have to decide right now. No, I don't. The realization was oddly freeing. She didn't owe Martha immediate forgiveness or reconciliation. She could just sit with the apology, let it exist, and decide later what it meant. That evening, after the children were asleep and the ranch was settled for the night, Naomi showed the letter to Caleb. He read it carefully, then set it aside. You going to forgive her? He asked. I think I already did, mostly, a long time ago. Naomi leaned against him on the porch steps where they'd taken to sitting on warm evenings. Being angry at her was exhausting, and once I stopped needing to prove her wrong about me, the anger just kind of faded. That's probably the healthiest thing I've ever heard you say. Don't get used to it. I'm still holding grudges against at least 3 other people. Caleb laughed. Only 3? You're mellowing in your old age. I'm 26. Ancient. She elbowed him, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. These were the moments Naomi treasured most. Not the dramatic ones, not the crises survived or victories won, but these quiet spaces between where life just was. Where she could exist without fighting, without proving, without constantly defending her right to be here. I want to marry you again, Caleb said suddenly. Naomi blinked. We're already married. I know, but the first time was practical, rushed. I want to do it again, proper-like, with vows that mean what we actually feel instead of what we thought we should say. He turned to face her. I want to marry you when we're not desperate, when we're choosing it because we want to, not because we need to. That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me. Is that a yes? Naomi thought about it, about standing in that church a year ago, scared and uncertain, promising to build something she wasn't sure would last. And about standing here now, certain and grounded, having already built it. Yes, she said. Let's get married again. They did it in early May, on a Sunday after church, with the same small group who'd witnessed the first wedding. But this time felt different. Emma and Daniel stood with them, part of the ceremony rather than just observers. Naomi wore a new dress, nothing fancy, but made with care from fabric she'd bought with her own teaching money. Caleb had gotten a haircut and looked almost nervous. Like this time the stakes were higher, even though technically nothing was changing. Reverend Michaels seemed bemused but willing. I've married the same couple twice before, he said, but never by choice. Usually it's because the paperwork got lost. Think of it as an upgrade, Caleb said. Renewal, Naomi corrected. We're renewing vows that we've actually lived up to. When it came time for those vows, they'd written their own. Caleb went first, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. Naomi, a year ago I promised to provide for you and protect you and honor you. I've done my best at that. But what I didn't promise, what I didn't know how to promise, was that I'd love you for exactly who you are. Not because you're useful or strong or good with the kids, though you're all those things, but because you're you. Stubborn and fierce and too smart for your own good sometimes. Because you make me want to be better than I am. Because when I think about the future, I can't imagine it without you in it. He took her hands. So that's what I'm promising now. To love you. On purpose. For as long as we both shall live. Naomi had to blink back tears before she could speak. Caleb, when I came here, I was looking for someone to save me. Instead, I found someone who let me save myself. Who gave me space to figure out who I was and what I wanted, and then supported those things even when they made life harder. She squeezed his hands. I promise to keep being myself, the stubborn, fierce, too smart version that drives you crazy sometimes. I promise to keep building this life with you, through good seasons and bad. And I promise to love you not despite your flaws, but including them, because they're part of what makes you real. She smiled through her tears. Also, I promise to keep teaching you how to cook, because your eggs are still terrible. Laughter rippled through the small gathering. Even Reverend Michaels was smiling. By the power vested in me and having already done this once, I suppose I get to do it again. I pronounce you husband and wife. Still, again. Whatever we're calling this. Caleb kissed her, and this time it felt like sealing something that had already been sealed, like adding a lock to a door that was already closed against the outside world. When they pulled apart, Emma was crying happy tears, and Daniel was trying very hard to look like he wasn't. The celebration afterward was simple. Cake at the ranch, coffee that was actually good for once because Mrs. Patterson had made it, and conversation that flowed easy and warm. People stayed until the sun set, then drifted home in ones and twos, leaving Naomi and Caleb and the children to clean up in companionable silence. Best wedding ever, Emma declared, scraping frosting from a plate. You were at the first one too, Daniel pointed out. Yeah, but this one was better because it wasn't sad nervous, it was happy nervous. Emma looked at Naomi. You're really staying forever now, right? I was really staying forever before, too. I know, but now it's extra official. Naomi laughed and pulled Emma into a hug. Extra official. I like that. Later, alone in their room while the children slept, Caleb pulled Naomi close. Thank you. For what? For giving me a second chance. At this, at everything. His voice was rough. I know I wasn't easy at first, wasn't open, wasn't... You were grieving and scared and trying to hold everything together with both hands. Naomi touched his face. You did the best you could. We both did. And now? Now we do better. Because we know how. He kissed her, slow and thorough, and Naomi kissed him back with the certainty of someone who'd finally stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. This was her life. This was her choice. And it was good. Yeah. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that made even morning chores exhausting. The school year ended, giving Naomi a brief respite from teaching, though she still tutored a few students who'd fallen behind. The ranch demanded constant attention, irrigation ditches to maintain, cattle to manage, a garden that required daily tending in the brutal sun. But there were good moments, too. Swimming in the creek on particularly hot days, Emma and Daniel splashing and shrieking while Naomi and Caleb watched from the bank. Long evenings on the porch after the worst heat had passed. The satisfaction of watching plants grow that they'd tended from seeds. In late June, the territorial teacher training program that Mrs. Blackwell had mentioned finally happened, a 2-week intensive course in Great Falls. Naomi almost didn't go, worried about leaving the ranch and the children for that long, but Caleb insisted. You need this, he said firmly. The credentials, yeah, but also the chance to talk to other teachers, learn new methods. We'll manage. What if... We'll manage, he repeated. Go, learn, come back and make your school even better. So she went, traveling by stage to Great Falls and spending 2 weeks immersed in educational theory and practical techniques. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Being challenged intellectually, debating teaching philosophies, discovering she had opinions about pedagogy she hadn't even known existed. But what struck her most was meeting other frontier teachers, mostly women, all struggling with the same challenges she faced: limited resources, diverse skill levels, community skepticism, the pressure to prove themselves worthy of respect and funding. They shared strategies, commiserated about difficult students and skeptical parents, and formed bonds that felt important even though they'd likely never see each other again. On the last day, the instructor, a formidable woman named Miss Cartwright, who'd been teaching for 30 years, pulled Naomi aside. You're good at this, she said bluntly. Better than most. And you care, which matters more than people think. She handed Naomi a certificate of completion. Don't let anyone tell you you're not qualified enough or experienced enough or whatever nonsense they come up with. You're doing important work. Keep doing it. The validation from someone who actually knew what they were talking about hit different than Mrs. Blackwell's measured approval. Naomi carried it home like a talisman. When she arrived back at the ranch, Emma and Daniel nearly tackled her off the wagon. Even Caleb looked relieved, though he tried to hide it. How was it? He asked, after the children had finally gone to bed, and they had a moment alone. Good, really good. Naomi showed him the certificate, the notes she'd taken, the books she'd bought with her carefully saved money. I learned so much. And I met other teachers who are dealing with exactly what I'm dealing with. It made me feel less alone. You're not alone. You have us. I know, but having people who understand the specific challenges of teaching, that's different. She looked at him. How were things here? We survived. Barely. He grinned. The house is messier. We ate a lot of bread and cheese, and I may have yelled at Daniel more than necessary, but we survived. I'm proud of you. For not burning the house down? For managing without me? For not making me feel guilty about going? She kissed him. For being a real partner instead of just letting me do everything. I'm still learning, but I'm trying. That's all any of us can do. August brought the kind of brutal heat that made everyone short-tempered and tired. But it also brought news. The town council had approved funding for an actual school building. Not immediately, but within the next 2 years. They'd start with a one-room structure, expandable if enrollment continued to grow. Naomi attended the council meeting where they announced it, sitting in the back and trying not to get her hopes up too high. But when they called her name and asked if she'd be willing to continue as the head teacher once the building was complete, she felt something crack open in her chest. "I'd be honored," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. After the meeting, several council members approached to congratulate her. Even William Parsons was there, having been elected to the council earlier that year. He stood in the back, not speaking to her but not leaving either. Finally, as people filtered out, he approached. "Mrs. Turner." His voice was neutral, carefully controlled. "Mr. Parsons, congratulations on the school, it's well deserved." Naomi studied him, trying to read his expression. He looked older than when she'd first met him, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. "Thank you. I was wrong about you." The words came out stiff, like they hurt. "When you first arrived, I judged you on things that didn't matter and missed what did. That was my mistake." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was close. Naomi considered pushing for more, for a real acknowledgement of how he'd humiliated her. Then she realized she didn't need it. His mistake had led her to exactly where she needed to be. "Yes," she said simply. "It was." She walked past him and out into the evening air, where Caleb was waiting with the wagon. He took one look at her face and grinned. "Good news?" "The best. They're building a real school, and they want me to run it." He picked her up and spun her around right there in the street, laughing. I told you you were brilliant." "You're biased." "I'm right." On the ride home, Naomi watched the sun set over the mountains and thought about the strange path that had brought her here. If Parsons had accepted her, she'd be living a comfortable but suffocating life, slowly disappearing into someone else's expectations. Instead, his rejection had forced her to build something of her own, a family she'd chosen, work that mattered, a community that valued her for reasons that were actually important. Sometimes the worst thing that happened to you turned out to be the best thing. Not because the pain didn't matter, but because what you built from the pieces was stronger than what existed before. September brought the start of a new school year, Naomi's second as an official teacher. The enrollment had grown to 23 students now, ranging from 5 to 15. The church basement was bursting at the seams, but the promise of a real building kept everyone optimistic. But the new school year also brought a new challenge. A family arrived in town with a daughter who was deaf. Her name was Margaret. Not the spiteful Margaret Henshaw, but a quiet 10-year-old who watched the world with intelligent eyes and communicated through signs her family had developed at home. Her mother, Mrs. Brennan, approached Naomi with a mixture of hope and resignation. "I know it's probably too much to ask with so many students already, but Sarah, that's Margaret. She wants to learn so badly. She's smart, just different. If you could maybe just let her sit in, try to follow along." "Of course she can attend," Naomi said immediately. "Let me figure out how to teach her properly." Mrs. Brennan looked stunned. "Really? Just like that?" "Just like that. Give me a few days to prepare, and we'll get her started." What followed was 2 weeks of intense learning on Naomi's part. She wrote to schools for the deaf back east, begging for resources and advice. She worked with Margaret and her family to learn their signs and figure out how to adapt lessons. She enlisted the help of her other students, explaining that Margaret would be joining them and they needed to be patient while everyone learned how to communicate. The first day Margaret attended was chaos. The other students were curious and clumsy, trying too hard or not trying at all. Margaret was overwhelmed, frustrated that she couldn't follow the lessons the way she wanted. Naomi spent more time managing confusion than actually teaching. But by the end of the first week, something shifted. The students figured out how to include Margaret in group work. Emma appointed herself unofficial translator, learning signs with enthusiasm and teaching them to the others. And Margaret, given the right support, proved to be exactly as smart as her mother claimed. A month in, Jack Peterson, Naomi's former troublemaker turned dedicated student, approached her after class. "Teaching Margaret is taking a lot of your time," he said. "Maybe I could help with the younger kids' reading. I'm pretty good at it now." Naomi looked at him, this 14-year-old boy who'd once thrown paper and disrupted lessons, now offering to help teach others. "That would be wonderful, Jack. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. I might be terrible at it." But he wasn't. He was patient and encouraging in a way that surprised everyone, including himself. And watching him work with the younger students, Naomi realized something important. Teaching wasn't just about imparting knowledge. It was about creating a community where everyone had something to offer, where helping each other was just what you did. By October, Margaret was fully integrated into the classroom. She still needed accommodations and extra help, but she was learning at the same pace as her peers. More than that, she'd made friends, real friends who saw her as Margaret, not just the deaf girl. Mrs. Brennan came by one afternoon near tears. I never thought. We were told she'd never be able to attend regular school, that she'd always be behind. But you've given her a chance to be normal.
She was always normal, Naomi said gently. She just needed people willing to meet her where she was instead of expecting her to be something else. It was a lesson Naomi kept returning to, in teaching, in parenting, in marriage. People weren't problems to be fixed. They were just themselves, with their own strengths and challenges, deserving of respect and accommodation, and the chance to be fully who they were. Winter came again, the second one since Naomi had arrived, but this time it felt different. The house was tighter, the supplies more adequate, the family more practiced at surviving the harsh months. Emma and Daniel had grown so much. Emma was nearly 11 now, reading books that challenged even Naomi. Daniel was 12 and taking on more responsibility around the ranch, working alongside Caleb with increasing competence. On a particularly cold evening in January, with snow falling thick outside and the fire crackling warm inside, Daniel looked up from his homework. "Ma, you think we could get a dog?" Naomi exchanged glances with Caleb. They'd discussed this before. Animals meant another mouth to feed, another responsibility. But they'd also talked about how the ranch could use a good working dog, and how the children were old enough to help care for one. "What kind of dog?" Caleb asked. "A big one, for herding and protecting the chickens." Daniel's eyes lit up with rare enthusiasm. "Mr. Peterson's dog had puppies. He's giving them away to good homes." "We'll think about it," Naomi said, which in parent language meant probably yes if certain conditions were met. 2 weeks later, they had a dog, a gangly shepherd mix puppy that Daniel named Scout and immediately claimed as his own. The puppy was chaos incarnate, chewing everything, tripping everyone, and generally making life more complicated. But watching Daniel take responsibility for training Scout, seeing Emma's delight when the puppy learned a new trick, hearing the way the house felt more alive with an animal in it, all of that made the chaos worth it. "We're turning into a real family," Caleb observed one evening, watching Daniel and Emma play with Scout in the snow while Naomi stood beside him. "We've been a real family for a while now." "Yeah, but now we have the dog to prove it." He grinned, then turned serious. "You ever think about having more kids? Our own, I mean." The question caught Naomi off guard. They'd been careful, not actively preventing, but not actively trying either, letting nature take its course. "Do you want more kids?" "I don't know. Maybe." He looked at her. "But only if you do. You're already juggling so much." Naomi thought about it, about Emma and Daniel, about the 23 students she taught, about the ranch and the house, and all the demands on her time and energy. Adding a baby to that mix seemed insane, but she also thought about holding an infant of her own, about Caleb's eyes and a tiny face, about Emma and Daniel as older siblings. "Maybe," she said finally, "but not yet. Let's get through the new school building first, make sure the ranch is stable. Then we can think about it." "Fair enough." They stood together in the cold, watching their children play, and Naomi felt something settle in her chest. This was enough. Right now, this moment, this life, it was enough. If more came later, wonderful. But she didn't need more to feel complete. Spring returned with its usual mix of hope and hard work. The school building was finally breaking ground, scheduled for completion by fall. Naomi spent her free time working with the builders on design, making sure the space would actually function for teaching. She wanted windows for light, storage for materials, a stove that could actually heat the room, separate areas for different age groups. The builders humored her, mostly, though she could tell they thought she was being demanding. But Dr. Morrison, who was overseeing the project, backed her up. "Mrs. Turner knows what she needs. If she says we need more windows, we need more windows." Construction was slower than expected, plagued by material delays and weather setbacks. But by late August, the building was nearly finished. A simple one-room structure, but solid and well-built with everything Naomi had requested.
The first day of school in the new building was in early September. Naomi arrived an hour before the students, just to stand in the empty room and absorb what had been accomplished. Real desks instead of makeshift benches, actual chalkboards, windows that let in beautiful light, shelves for books and materials, a space designed for learning instead of borrowed and made to work. She thought about that first day teaching in the church basement, freezing and uncertain, wondering if she could actually do this. And she thought about standing here now, in a building that existed in part because people believed in her ability to teach. The students arrived in a flood of excitement and noise, exploring the new space with the enthusiasm of children seeing something genuinely new. Margaret Brennan ran her hands along the smooth desks, her face glowing. Jack Peterson tested every chair to find the best one. Emma and Daniel tried to act cool, but couldn't quite hide their pride that their mother had helped create this. That first day in the new school was chaotic and wonderful and exhausting. By the time Naomi locked up that evening, her voice was hoarse and her feet ached, and she couldn't stop smiling. Caleb was waiting with the wagon, Scout panting happily in the back. "How was it?" "Perfect. Terrible. Amazing." Naomi climbed up beside him. "Everything I hoped and nothing like I expected." "That sounds about right for teaching." They drove home in comfortable silence, and Naomi thought about how far she'd come. Not just in miles from Ohio to Montana, but in every other way that mattered, from invisible to valued, from uncertain to confident, from alone to surrounded by people who loved her so. October brought cool weather and the first serious discussions about the future. Caleb's cooperative venture with the other ranchers had worked better than expected, bringing in enough profit that for the first time since Naomi had arrived, they had actual savings. Not a fortune, but enough to feel less desperate. One evening, Caleb spread papers on the kitchen table. Account books, receipts, carefully tallied numbers. "We need to talk about what comes next." "That sounds ominous." "It's not. It's good, actually." He pointed to the totals. "We made it through. The ranch is stable, the cooperative's working, your teaching income is steady. We're not rich, but we're secure for the first time in years." "So what comes next?" "That's what I'm asking you. What do you want?" He looked at her seriously. "More kids? Expanding the ranch? Saving for the children's future? You getting more training for teaching? All of the above?" Naomi looked at the numbers, at the evidence of everything they'd built together. "I want security for the kids, real security, so they have choices we didn't have. I want to keep teaching, maybe eventually train other teachers if the territory keeps growing. And," she hesitated, And I want to enjoy what we have. We've spent so long just surviving that I forgot we're allowed to actually live." She took his hand. "So yes to saving for the kids. Yes to me getting more training when it's available. But also yes to taking a day off sometimes. To celebrating what we've built instead of immediately looking for the next problem." Caleb smiled. "I can work with that." They drew up plans that night. Practical ones about money and land and children's futures, but also looser ones about hopes and dreams and the life they wanted to build. It felt different than those first desperate months of just trying to make it to tomorrow. This was choosing a future instead of simply surviving into one. November brought a surprise, a letter from the Territorial Education Board offering Naomi a position as a regional training coordinator for New Frontier teachers. It would mean occasional travel to other communities, sharing what she'd learned, helping establish new schools. The pay was better than her current position, and it came with an impressive title that made her feel like an imposter just reading it. She showed the letter to Caleb, uncertain what to think. "This is incredible," he said. "They want you to train other teachers?" "Apparently I've been doing something right." "You've been doing everything right. You should take it." "But it means being gone sometimes, leaving you with the kids and the ranch." "Naomi." He set down the letter and took her hands. "Stop waiting for permission to succeed. Stop making yourself smaller so everyone else can be comfortable. This is an honor and an opportunity, and you've earned it." His voice was fierce. "Take the job. We'll figure out the rest." So she did, writing back her acceptance with hands that shook slightly from excitement and fear in equal measure. The regional coordinator position would start in January, giving her time to finish the fall term and prepare. When she told her students she'd be taking on additional responsibilities, Jack Peterson raised his hand. "Does that mean you're leaving us?" "No. It means I'll still teach here, but a few times a year I'll travel to other communities to help them set up their own schools." She looked around the classroom. "You're stuck with me for a while longer." The relief on their faces was visible, and Naomi realized with a start that she mattered to these children, not just as a teacher, but as someone they depended on, someone whose presence made their lives better. It was humbling and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Christmas that year was the best one yet. They had enough money for real gifts: a book for Emma, quality tools for Daniel, a new dress for Naomi that Caleb had picked out himself, new gloves for Caleb that actually fit. The house was warm, the food was plentiful, and the mood was genuinely festive. On Christmas Eve, after the children were asleep, Naomi and Caleb sat by the fire with Scout snoring at their feet. "You think Sarah would be happy?" Caleb asked suddenly. "About all this. About us." It was the first time he'd asked directly, and Naomi took the question seriously. "I think Sarah would want her children to be loved and cared for. I think she'd want you to be happy instead of alone. And I think she'd probably have opinions about my teaching methods and your cooking that she'd share whether we wanted them or not." She looked at him. "But mostly I think she'd be relieved that you found someone, that the kids are thriving, that this place became a home again instead of just a reminder of what you lost." "You think about her?" "Sometimes. Wonder what she was like, what she'd think of me." Naomi stared into the fire. "But mostly I just try to be good to her children and her husband. That seems like the best way to honor her memory." "You're better than good. You're everything." Caleb pulled her closer. "I don't say it enough, but you saved us. All of us. We saved each other. That's how the best things work." They sat in comfortable silence until the fire burned low, then went to bed with the contentment of people who'd finally stopped fighting long enough to enjoy what they'd won. The new year arrived with fresh snow and fresh possibilities. Naomi's first trip as a regional coordinator was in late January, a 3-day journey to a struggling community 2 counties over. She left with detailed instructions for Caleb, reassurances for the children, and a stomach full of butterflies. The community she visited was smaller and poorer than her own, the would-be teacher young and overwhelmed. Naomi spent 3 days sharing everything she'd learned: classroom management techniques, ways to teach multiple age groups simultaneously, how to stretch limited resources, strategies for getting community buy-in. She also listened, learning about challenges specific to this region, problems she hadn't encountered yet. On the last day, the young teacher, a girl barely 20 named Alice, grabbed Naomi's hands. "Thank you. I was ready to give up. I thought I was too stupid or too weak or just not cut out for this." Tears streamed down Alice's face. "But you made me see I'm not alone, that everyone struggles at first." Naomi thought about her own first days teaching, the mistakes and doubts and near disasters. "You're not alone. None of us are. We're all just figuring this out together." She squeezed Alice's hands. "Write to me if you need help or advice, or just someone who understands." "I will. Thank you." On the journey home, Naomi thought about Alice and all the other teachers struggling in isolated communities across the territory. This work, helping them, connecting them, making sure they didn't face their challenges alone, this felt important in a way that went beyond just her own classroom. When she arrived home, Emma and Daniel tackled her with hugs while Caleb hung back, grinning. "How was it?" he asked once the children finally released her. "Exhausting. Wonderful. Important." She looked at her family, her real, chosen family, and felt her heart swell. "But I'm glad to be home." "We're glad you're home too, though we managed okay. I only burned dinner twice." "Twice in 3 days? Improvement, right?" Naomi laughed and kissed him, and Scout barked enthusiastically, and the children groaned at the parental affection, and everything felt exactly as it should. Done. Spring came again, the 3rd spring since Naomi had arrived, and with it came a realization that she'd stopped counting, stopped measuring her life in terms of before and after, stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, stopped bracing for the next disaster. Somewhere along the way, this had simply become her life. Not the second choice life or the backup plan, but the actual life she wanted. She said as much to Caleb one evening while they worked in the garden, their hands in the soil, Scout supervising from a shady spot. I was thinking about that day I arrived, how terrified I was, how certain I was that I'd made a terrible mistake coming here. And now I can't imagine being anywhere else. She sat back on her heels, looking at the house and barn and fields that they'd maintained through sheer stubborn will. This place, it's not perfect. It's hard and uncertain, and there are still people who don't think I belong here, but it's mine, ours, and I fought for every inch of it. You did more than fight for it. You transformed it. Caleb gestured at the neat garden rows, the well-maintained buildings, the general air of a place that was cared for rather than just barely surviving. You took something that was dying and made it live again. We did that together. Yeah, we did. He pulled her close, not caring that they were both covered in dirt. I love you, Naomi Turner. Have I mentioned that recently? Not in the last few hours. I was starting to worry. He laughed and kissed her, and Naomi kissed him back with the easy affection of people who'd earned their happiness through sheer persistence and weren't taking it for granted. That evening, with the children doing homework and Scout sprawled by the fire and dinner cooking on the stove, Naomi looked around the small house and felt something rare and precious. Peace. Not the absence of problems. There would always be problems, challenges, difficulties to overcome. But peace in knowing she could handle them. Peace in knowing she wasn't alone. Peace in knowing that she'd finally found the place where she fit. Emma looked up from her book. Ma, you're smiling at nothing again. Just happy. That's weird. Probably, but I'm okay with being weird. Daniel snorted. Good thing, because you're definitely weird. So's your face, Emma shot back automatically. Children, Caleb said from where he was attempting to repair a broken chair leg. Play nice. We are playing nice, they said in unison, then went back to their respective activities. Naomi caught Caleb's eye, and they shared a look of parental amusement and exasperation. This was it. The ordinary, chaotic, imperfect life they'd built together. No drama, no crisis, just the daily work of loving each other and trying to do better. Summer arrived with its usual heat and demands, but also with news that made everything else seem small. Naomi was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks but hadn't said anything, wanting to be certain before raising hopes. But when Dr. Morrison confirmed it in early June, she could no longer keep it to herself. She told Caleb first, on a quiet evening after the children were asleep. He stared at her for a long moment, processing, then pulled her into his arms. You're sure? Morrison's sure. I'm about 3 months along, due in December. December. Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. We're having a baby. We're having a baby. Saying it out loud made it feel more real, more terrifying, more wonderful. Are you happy? Terrified, but yeah, happy. He pulled back to look at her. How are you feeling? Tired, a little sick in the mornings, mostly just overwhelmed. She touched her still flat stomach. I wasn't sure if I wanted this. Another child on top of everything else, but now that it's happening, you're excited. I'm excited. They told Emma and Daniel the next day. Emma shrieked with joy and immediately started planning how she'd help with the baby. Daniel looked stunned, processed for a moment, then grinned. So we're really doing this? Being a whole family? We've been a whole family for a while now, Naomi said gently. But yes, we're adding to it. Cool. He paused. Can I teach the baby to ride when it's old enough? You can teach the baby whatever you want, within reason. What if it's a girl? Then she'll probably be the best rider of all of you. Emma nodded seriously. Girls are better at everything anyway. Hey, Daniel protested, but he was smiling. Watching them discuss their future sibling with excitement and zero hesitation, Naomi felt her eyes sting with tears. These children had accepted her so completely, loved her so freely, that they couldn't imagine a new baby being anything other than wonderful. She'd done something right, somewhere along the way, to earn that kind of trust. The pregnancy progressed normally, though teaching became more challenging as Naomi's body changed. She was exhausted most of the time, her feet hurt constantly, and by September she could barely see her own feet past her growing belly. But she kept teaching, kept traveling for her coordinator work, kept managing the household because stopping felt like giving up. Finally, in early November, with winter closing in and Naomi 8 months pregnant, Caleb put his foot down. You need to rest. Actually rest. Not your version of resting, which is still doing 12 things at once. I'm fine. You're exhausted. You fell asleep standing up yesterday. I watched it happen. That was one time, Naomi. He took her hands, his expression serious. I know you're scared to slow down. Scared that if you stop proving your worth, people will realize you're not actually superhuman. But you're pregnant, you're tired, and pushing yourself this hard isn't good for you or the baby. What about the school, the students? Jack Peterson's been helping you teach for months. Make him your assistant officially. Give him more responsibility. Caleb's voice gentled. Let other people help. Trust that they can handle it. It went against every instinct Naomi had developed over the past 2 years. But she was tired, bone-tired in a way that scared her. And the baby was moving less lately, which Dr. Morrison said was normal but made her anxious anyway. Okay, she said finally. I'll cut back. Let Jack handle more. Actually rest. The relief on Caleb's face told her she'd made the right decision. Over the next few weeks, Naomi slowly relinquished control. Jack took over teaching the younger students their reading. Emma and Daniel handled more household chores. Caleb managed the ranch with help from neighbors. And Naomi, reluctantly at first, and then with increasing relief, let herself simply be pregnant, resting when she needed to, accepting help when it was offered, trusting that the world wouldn't fall apart if she wasn't holding it together. Ikok. The baby came in mid-December, during a snowstorm that made getting Dr. Morrison to the ranch an adventure. Naomi labored for 12 hours, supported by Caleb, who looked more terrified than she felt, and Mrs. Patterson, who delivered half the babies in the territory and maintained calm competence throughout. When the baby finally arrived, a girl, healthy and loud, Naomi held her daughter and felt something click into place. This was her child. Not adopted, not inherited, but hers from the beginning. The weight of that responsibility was crushing and exhilarating in equal measure. What are we naming her? Caleb asked, his voice rough with emotion as he held his daughter for the first time. They discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at the tiny face that somehow looked like both of them, Naomi knew. Hope, she said. Her name is Hope. Emma and Daniel were allowed in to meet their sister once things were cleaned up and Naomi was presentable. They approached cautiously, like the baby might break, then melted with instant adoration. She's so small, Emma whispered, touching Hope's tiny hand with one finger. You were that small once, Caleb said. No way. I was never that small. Daniel just stared, his expression a mix of wonder and concern. We have to keep her safe. We will, Naomi assured him, all of us together. That night, with Hope sleeping in a cradle beside the bed, and Caleb's arm around her, Naomi thought about everything that had led to this moment. The rejection, the desperation, the slow building of a life from absolutely nothing, the fears and doubts and near disasters, the victories and losses, and everything in between. She thought about the woman who'd stepped off that stage nearly 2 years ago, broken and invisible, certain she'd never be enough. And she thought about who she'd become, a teacher respected by her community, a mother to 3 children, a wife to a man who actually saw her, a woman who'd built something real from the ashes of rejection. The journey hadn't been smooth or easy or anything like what she'd imagined, but it had been hers, every painful step, every hard-won victory, and it had led her exactly where she needed to be. Spring arrived once more, bringing with it the usual renewal and hope. Hope was 6 months old now, a happy baby who smiled easily and rarely fussed. Emma and Daniel were devoted older siblings, fighting over who got to hold her, who could make her laugh harder. The school year was winding down, with plans already underway for expanding the building to accommodate increasing enrollment. One warm afternoon in May, Naomi stood in front of her classroom watching her students work on their final projects of the year. Jack Peterson was helping the younger students with their penmanship. Margaret Brennan was teaching another student the signs she'd learned. Emma and several other girls were collaborating on a writing assignment. Daniel and his friends were building a model of the new school expansion. This was what she'd built. Not just a place of learning, but a community where everyone contributed, where differences were accommodated, where helping each other was just what you did. It wasn't perfect. There were still struggles, still students who fell behind, still days when nothing went right. But it was real, and it mattered. After school, Naomi walked home slowly, in no rush despite having things to do. The sun was warm, the breeze gentle, and the mountains in the distance were green with spring growth. She thought about writing a letter to Martha, maybe finally responding to that apology from months ago. Not because she needed closure, but because maybe Martha deserved to know that forgiveness was possible, that people could change and grow and become better than they were. At home, Caleb was working on the new chicken coop expansion while Scout supervised and Hope napped in a basket in the shade. He looked up when Naomi approached, his face lighting with the smile he reserved just for her. "Good day?" "The best." She kissed him, then picked up Hope, who was starting to fuss. "How were things here?" "Productive, got the frame up for the coop, fixed the irrigation issue in the back field, and Hope only cried for about 10 minutes total. I'm calling that a win." They stood together in their yard, surrounded by everything they'd built, the house they'd repaired, the land they'd tended, the family they'd created through choice and commitment and love that had started practical and become profound. "You ever regret it?" Naomi asked, echoing his question from a year ago. "Asking me to stay that first day? Never. Not once. Not even on the hard days." He pulled her close, careful of the baby between them. "You're the best thing that ever happened to this family, Naomi Turner. And I don't tell you that enough. You show me every day. That's better." They went inside together, into the house that was now actually a home, and started preparing dinner while Emma and Daniel arrived home arguing about something inconsequential, and Scout begged for scraps, and Hope gurgled happily in her basket, and life went on in all its messy, imperfect, absolutely beautiful glory. Naomi had learned something important over the past 2 years. Worth wasn't something you proved to other people. It was something you claimed for yourself, then defended with everything you had. She'd been rejected, judged, dismissed as not enough. And instead of shrinking to fit other people's expectations, she'd expanded, becoming more herself, building a life on her own terms, refusing to apologize for taking up space. The woman who'd been discarded as plain and inadequate had become a teacher shaping the future of a frontier community, a mother raising children with love and strength, a partner building something real with someone who saw her clearly and loved what he saw. She'd transformed rejection into opportunity, humiliation into growth, desperation into determination, and in doing so, she had learned the most important lesson of all. You didn't need to be perfect to be enough. You just needed to be willing to keep showing up, keep fighting, keep building, even when everything seemed impossible. Worth wasn't about being flawless. It was about being real, being committed, being unafraid to claim what was yours. That evening, after dinner was cleared and the children were doing homework and Hope was asleep, Naomi stood on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains she'd once feared would swallow her whole. They looked different now, not threatening, but protective. A wall between her new life and the old one, keeping her safe in the world she'd built. Caleb joined her, sliding his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "How far we've come. How much has changed." She leaned into him. "How glad I am that William Parsons was exactly the fool he was. Because otherwise I'd never have found this." "You would have found something. Maybe. But not this. Not you and the kids and this specific life." She turned to face him. "This is what I was meant for, Caleb. Not some comfortable existence where I disappeared into someone else's expectations. This, the struggle and the work, and the absolute certainty that I matter. You've always mattered. You just finally have people who know how to see it." They stood like that as darkness fell and stars emerged, and Naomi thought about all the women who'd come west looking for something: safety, opportunity, a fresh start, a place to belong. Some found it, some didn't. She'd been lucky, but it had been more than luck. It had been choice after choice, made in fear and courage, building towards something she couldn't have imagined when she started. Inside, Emma called that she needed help with her arithmetic. Daniel announced Scout had eaten his homework again. Hope started crying her hungry cry. The ordinary chaos of family life reasserted itself, and Naomi went to meet it with a full heart and steady hands. This was her life now, the one she'd built from nothing when everything she'd planned fell apart. It was hard and uncertain and required more of her than she'd sometimes thought she had to give, but it was real. It was hers, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. Years later, when Hope was old enough to ask questions and Emma and Daniel were grown with their own struggles and triumphs, Naomi would tell them about that first day. About standing in Bennett's general store being told she wasn't enough. About the terror and humiliation. About how it had felt like the end of everything. And then she'd tell them what came next, how sometimes the worst thing that happened to you became the door to the best thing. How being rejected for who you weren't gave you permission to become fully who you were. How the people who didn't want you made room for the people who would love you completely. How failure and success were sometimes the same thing, viewed from different angles. But mostly she'd tell them this: worth isn't given by other people. It's claimed by yourself, proven through action, and defended with every choice you make. And once you truly understood that, once you stopped seeking permission to exist and just started existing, the world opened up in ways you couldn't have imagined. She'd been discarded as inadequate, and she'd built something extraordinary from that rejection because she'd refused to accept someone else's judgment as truth. That was the real story. That was what mattered. Not the rejection, but what came after. The choices, the persistence, the absolute refusal to be less than she was. In the end, that was enough. She was enough. She always had been. She just needed to find the place and people who could see it, and to see it in herself. And now, standing in the home she'd made and the life she'd chosen, surrounded by family she'd built from scattered pieces and love she'd earned through showing up every single day, Naomi finally, completely believed it.